I heard the click before I saw the face. It was a soft, metallic sound, the kind a key makes when it fails to slide home. I sat perfectly still in my office chair, mid-sentence in an inventory report, and stared at the door leading to the hallway. Another jiggle. I muted my keyboard. And then, silence. From the hallway, I crept toward the front door, heart calm, fingers cold. I didn't open it. I looked through the peephole, and there he was, tan, 20-something, wearing a smirk that said this wasn't his first time trying this key. He tilted his head, tried again. The lock didn't budge. I watched him curse silently and glance around like he'd forgotten his cue. He wasn't nervous, just confused, like a guy who'd shown up to his usual parking spot and found a fire hydrant in its place. I didn't open the door. I took a photo, then turned, walked through the kitchen, and into the garage where I stood next to my car and let my hands find something solid. The cold metal of my Craftsman toolbox felt steadier than anything else in that moment. 3 days earlier, I'd changed the locks. Not because I suspected cheating, not then. It was because Deanna lost her keys for the third time in a month. I'd chalked it up to distraction. She was always distracted lately, with work, with yoga, with you wouldn't understand. But this was new. And suddenly everything in the last month reframed itself. The sports drink in the fridge. Neon blue. I drink coffee, water, sometimes scotch. That bottle had been sitting there since last Wednesday, untouched, sweating in silence like a witness. The blinds in the living room, left slightly open when I always closed them. I thought it was Deanna being careless. But the angle was wrong, too low. Like someone trying to peek from the couch without being seen. There was a scuff mark on the hallway baseboard, right about hip level. I remember because I noticed it on my way back from the bathroom a week ago and made a mental note to clean it. Now, I saw it with new eyes, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit, and suddenly explained the picture. I walked back inside like a man entering a crime scene in his own home. Slowly, methodically. That night, I accessed the security logs from our home automation system. I'd set it up myself, partly because I'm a logistics coordinator and partly because I like knowing where everything is and when. Motion sensor history. Door activity. Access logs. Tuesday, motion in the hallway, 1:12 p.m. Thursday, back door, opened and closed, 3:07 p.m. Friday, living room, movement detected, 11:54 a.m. None of those were times I was home. And Deanna? Supposedly at work, or with her mother. Right. I scrubbed through archived security camera footage. We only kept a week's worth, more than enough. And there he was. The same guy. Coming in through the back door like he belonged. Wearing that same smug confidence, tossing his shoes in the corner, plopping down on my couch, and drinking that same electric blue liquid while watching my TV. Deanna wasn't in any of the footage. She must have left the key and set the schedule. That was the night something cracked. Not loudly. Not with fireworks or screaming. I didn't confront her when she came home late again, saying, "Sorry, babe, the gym ran long." I didn't ask why she smelled like cologne that wasn't mine. I just nodded. Then I renamed the security folder on my desktop. From logs to entry. It wasn't just a title. It was a signal to myself. He had entered. She had opened the door. And now it was my turn. Deanna waltzed in at 11:47 p.m. with the casual confidence of a woman who thought the world still turned for her convenience. Work was a mess, she muttered, tossing her purse onto the hallway bench. It's always like this before quarterly reports. You wouldn't get it. She didn't wait for me to respond. She never did lately. Her heels clicked across the hardwood as she made her way to the bedroom, already peeling off her blazer, oblivious to the fact that I was watching from the kitchen, not angry, not desperate, just documenting. Her laptop bag landed on the floor with a thud. I noted the time, added it to the spreadsheet. She disappeared into the bathroom. I heard the faint chime of her phone, the same one she always left face down. Always on silent. Always low on battery. I didn't ask who it was. I already knew the ringtone was set to custom for someone saved under Mallory. Mallory didn't wear size 11 Nikes with neon orange soles. Mallory didn't drink cherry lime body armor. And Mallory sure as hell didn't jiggle our front door with a key that no longer worked. Instead of asking questions she'd lie through, I opened my laptop and began sorting data. The home system showed 12 unexplained entries over the past 6 weeks. Their sensors logged activity when I was either at work or grocery shopping. Some were only for a few minutes, just enough time for him to check if the coast was clear, maybe grab a shirt she accidentally left behind. Or, hell, I didn't want to finish the sentence. I printed screenshots, motion detected at odd hours, logs of entry from the back door, the guest room light flipping on despite being in used for over a year. It all went into the folder. Then came the footage, 3 stills of his shoes. Bright, ridiculous sneakers parked neatly by our entryway. One of them resting against my dog's old food bowl, the one Deanna refused to throw out because it had memories. Apparently, those memories had space for someone new. That bowl became the anchor, my symbol. A piece of the past used as a doormat by the future she was scripting without me. I zoomed in on it in the photo, framed the shot perfectly, saved it as relic.jpg. The folder now had timestamps, entry logs, zoomed images of his sneakers, and even a frame of him scratching himself through my bathrobe while drinking from a mug with my dad's name etched into the ceramic. I renamed the folder on my desktop. Entry. Caps lock. Bold font. No longer passive. No longer logs. This was the archive of betrayal. While she slept in the next morning, drooling on a pillow I paid for, in a bed I assembled with my own hands, I took the documents I'd prepped the night before and drove to my lawyer's office. No appointment. Just walked in and said, "I'd like to secure my property from trespassers." He blinked. Trespassers. I handed him the flash drive. One sleeping in my bed. The other thinks he lives in my house. 2 hours later, I left with a folder full of scorched earth paperwork. Property reaffirmation documents with my name solo. A civil restraining clause against unauthorized guests. And a custom-drafted eviction notice addressed to both Deanna and her mysterious visitor. The lawyer smirked when he handed me the copies. Cold. Precise. "You sure you're not one of us?" "Worse," I said. "I manage freight. I know exactly how much weight people carry when they think they're clever." Back home, she was still asleep. I placed the documents into 2 cream-colored envelopes. Identical. Unlabeled. Unassuming. One would be for her. One for the guy who thought he'd found a back door into someone else's life. I slipped both envelopes into my desk drawer, right above the folder labeled entry. Then I made coffee, sat at the table, waited. Because when you play it right, revenge isn't noisy. It's organized and on schedule. Saturday morning began like any other, by design. I brewed the coffee the same way I always did. Precise grind. Water to 198 degrees. 2 scoops of bitterness. I even made hers almond milk, splash of stevia, sprinkle of cinnamon on top like she preferred. I set it by her usual spot on the table and didn't say a word. The silence was intentional. Waited. She thought I was sulking about work again, that I was going through one of my moods. She didn't notice that I'd already showered, shaved, and dressed hours earlier, or that her mail was gone from the counter. The usual stack of her fashion catalogs, yoga flyers, and subscription junk mail had quietly disappeared. The only paper left in the entryway was a thin cream envelope. Unsealed. Unassuming. Resting like a quiet thread on the porch bench. Deanna breezed out of the bedroom in her overpriced athleisure set, the one she bought after her promotion. She kissed the top of my head absently, the way someone kisses a dog they forgot they already fed. "Going to hot yoga," she chirped. "Might stop by Lindsay's after." I nodded. Didn't look up. Just sipped my coffee. When the door closed behind her, I moved with the rhythm of a man executing a checklist. Step 1. Deadbolt. I opened the front door and installed a smart deadbolt, coded to my phone. It took 15 minutes. I disabled the keypad entry she used and replaced it with a new app-locked interface, silent, remote, invisible to anyone who wasn't me. Step 2. Reclaim. I went through the entire house. Removed every trace of her that occupied shared spaces, her scarves from the hallway hook, her planner from the kitchen corkboard, her incense from the bathroom drawer. Not destroyed. Just stored. Cataloged. Step 3. The envelope. I pulled the envelope from my desk and slid in the twin eviction notices. The names read like a warning label. Deanna Rivers. Jonathan Clay. I didn't bother sealing it. Let them see the contents. Let them feel the casualness of it all. On the top sheet, I included one handwritten line, just under their names. You gave him a key. I gave him a deadline. The porch bench was made of iron and wood. I placed the envelope dead center and weighed it down with one of her decorative rocks, the one painted with the word peace. I almost laughed at the irony. Step 4. Garage lockdown. I called the locksmith, the same guy who helped me after the last break-in years ago. I trusted him. Told him to reinforce the side door, swap the code pad, and install a second sensor inside. Paranoid? He asked, smiling. I smiled back. No. Just careful now. By 11:30 a.m., the house was reset. It looked the same, but the bones had shifted. The entry points sealed. The permissions revoked. The systems reprogrammed. I packed a small bag, just the essentials, laptop, chargers, a book I'd been pretending to read for months, and the USB drive labeled Exhibit Entry with every screenshot, every log, every still of that punk sitting on my couch. I left through the back door and drove out of town. No note. No voicemail. No, we need to talk. Just an empty house. An envelope on the porch. And silence sharp enough to cut bone. Because sometimes, the most brutal sound is the one you don't make. The first scream came at 6:19 p.m. Mrs. Keller from next door would later say it sounded like someone had seen blood or spilled it. She was halfway through baking a peach cobbler when she heard Deanna's voice tearing through the cul-de-sac like a siren made of glass. The second scream came seconds later. Angrier. Closer. Followed by a bang, bang, bang on the front door. Deanna had come home, and she couldn't get in. She rattled the door handle like it owed her money, then kicked it, once, twice, the thud echoing off the siding. Gary, she shrieked, like I'd just stepped into the shower, not like I was 60 miles away drinking black coffee in a quiet motel. Then, silence. She spotted it. The envelope on the porch bench, still pinned by the rock with the word peace painted in lavender script. She paused, picked it up, recognized her own name, and the other one, his, Jonathan Clay. She tore it open with both hands and unfolded the notice like it might scream back. The cul-de-sac was quiet enough that Mrs. Keller could hear her breath catch. What the F? Oh, is this? Deanna spat into the air. You have got to be kidding me. She spun toward the street just in time to see his car pull in, a dented white Altima with a missing front hubcap. He parked like he was arriving for dinner. No rush. No clue. She didn't even wait for him to step out. You idiot, she screamed, marching toward him with the envelope flapping in her hand like a weapon. Did you tell him? Did you leave something behind? You said he was dumb. He was supposed to be dumb. He froze mid-step. What are you talking about? I just came to. To what? She shrieked. To use the key? Go ahead. Try it. She pointed at the door like it was a trap sheet set. He walked over, pulled the key from his pocket, the same one I'd seen through the peephole, and tried the lock. Nothing. Again. Click. Nothing. He turned to her, now visibly sweating. Did you change it, or? Oh my God, you were such a moron, she hissed, throwing the envelope at his chest. He changed it. He knows. She turned back to the house and screamed at it like it might talk back. You passive-aggressive coward. You think this is going to scare me? You're hiding behind paperwork. Mrs. Keller, sweet woman that she is, called the police right then. Said the woman across the street was having a mental episode, possibly a domestic dispute, and that there were two people screaming, one of them kicking things. The sirens arrived less than 4 minutes later. A cruiser. Then another. Flashing red and blue lights danced across the garage door as 2 officers stepped out. Calm. Hands visible. Body cams blinking red. Ma'am, one of them said, stepping onto the porch. Can you explain what's going on? Yeah, she barked. I live here, and my husband locked me out like some psychopath. Do you have ID? Of course I have ID. It's my house. As she fumbled through her yoga bag, the officer picked up the crumpled envelope now laying by the steps. He read it once, then again. His partner was already on the phone, checking the property filings. Ma'am, the first one said, this is a valid eviction notice. Filed this morning. With your name and another party's. Dated and notarized. He owns the property outright. It says here your legal access was rescinded due to unauthorized key duplication. Deanna blinked like she'd just been slapped with a math problem. That's not, he can't do that. He didn't even talk to me. He doesn't have to, ma'am. This was served properly. You'll have to take it up with civil court. She stood there, breathless, chest heaving, rage boiling over but with nowhere to land. Then she collapsed onto the lawn. Not in grief. Not even in panic. Just flat on her back, like she'd been unplugged. One of the officers walked over and knelt beside her. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to vacate the premises. You can call a friend. A ride. But you cannot enter the house. Do you understand?" She stared at the clouds like they were judging her. Probably because they were. The body cam kept recording. I'd watch the footage later. In full. No edits. And I'd save it. Not because I wanted revenge anymore. Because at that moment, she finally looked exactly like what she was. Entitled. Exposed. Powerless. The first version hit Reddit at 9:07 a.m. Monday morning. A 31-second clip posted to our /public freakout by someone calling themselves Porch Justice 88. The caption read, "Lady loses her mind after getting locked out." The twist? She's not the homeowner. It started with a high-definition freeze frame. Deanna, jaw slack, eyeliner smudged, standing on our porch in a tangle of fury and disbelief. One sandal had slipped halfway off. Her hair was frizzed from pacing. And in her outstretched hand, captured perfectly, was the eviction notice, flapping like a flag of defeat. "Play," she screams. "He kicked me out of my house." The officer doesn't flinch. Calm, deliberate, almost bored. "Ma'am, this is his property." End scene. It spread like mold in a damp basement. TikTok snatched it up next. Then Instagram Reels. By noon, someone had auto-tuned the line, "He kicked me out of my house," into a remix and paired it with footage of cats being pushed off countertops. By dinner, someone made a meme template out of her face with the caption, "When you forget who's on the deed." I didn't post it. I didn't even know it existed until a coworker pulled me aside. "Hey Gary, this might be weird, but your porch looks exactly like this viral meltdown clip." I played dumb. Really? Huh. But when I got home, I poured a drink, opened the private folder, and renamed it. Exhibit A, Entitlement. The body cam footage that never got released. But a neighbor's doorbell cam had caught the moment from a wider angle. Unedited. No filter. The way she kicked the door. The way her face crumpled when the key didn't work. The scream that cracked on the last syllable like her ego was hitting pavement. It was all there. Public. Permanent. And while she spiraled in group chats and sobbed to mutual friends about privacy violations and illegal evictions, the internet did what the internet does best. Laughed. Anonymously. Brutally. And without mercy. One YouTube commentator called it the cleanest power move of the decade. Another video titled it, "How to Evict Your Cheating Wife Without Raising Your Voice." Someone slowed it down to 0.25x speed and added dramatic violin. Someone else turned it into a mock commercial for smart locks. And me? I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My phone buzzed a few times that week. Not from Deanna. She was still in shock. But from mutual acquaintances, her sister, even one of her yoga friends. All offering some version of, "We didn't know it was that bad. She's not doing well. Do you think she regrets it?" I didn't respond. Instead, I archived each message. Created a new folder. Labeled that one, Observers. Because they'd all watched her rewrite reality for years. Gaslight me into thinking I was controlling when I asked why she never answered calls. Dismissed my concerns about strange shoes by the door or schedules that never lined up. Said I was paranoid and micromanaging. Now they had a front row seat to the fallout. And I had receipts. A playlist. And absolute silence on my end. The video would fade eventually. New scandals would surface. The remix would be forgotten. But Deanna? She could never walk into a room again without wondering who had seen it, who had saved it, who had recognized her voice saying, "My house," while the law, and a calm cop, corrected her in front of the world. And me? I had the original file. Saved locally. Password protected. For the record. For the principle. For the precise moment she ever dared to try rewriting the truth again. The voicemail came in at 3:13 a.m. She always called at night when she wanted to lie in long form, when her sobs could blend into static and she could pretend there was poetry in regret. I didn't pick up. I just watched the screen glow from across the room, the contact name flashing. Deanna, line severed. Yes, I renamed her. She left a message, of course. She couldn't help herself. "Gary, please. Please just listen, okay? I know how this looks, but it wasn't serious. I swear to God, he didn't mean anything to me. It was just, God, I was lonely. You were always so far away, even when you were home. I just wanted to feel something again. I made a mistake. A stupid one. But it doesn't have to be like this. We can fix it. Just talk to me. Please. Just call me. Please. Click. No tears in my eyes. Just clarity. The kind you get after a long migraine fades and the lights don't hurt anymore. I hit forward and typed one word to my attorney. Documentation. Then hit send. At 10:42 a.m., my phone rang again. Unknown number. I was drinking coffee at the local hardware store, watching an elderly man buy a rake he didn't need. Hey, is this Gary? The voice was sheepish. Nervous. Young. This is Jonathan. I think I've been seeing your, well, I didn't know, your wife. Or ex-wife. Look, man, I didn't know she was married, okay? She told me she was separated. I sipped my coffee and let the silence expand. A few seconds passed. Then I said, plainly, now you do. He tried again. I mean, if I had known, I never would've. Doesn't matter now. Click. That silence wasn't mercy. It was precision. Because every time I didn't argue, didn't curse, didn't take the bait, they filled in the blanks with guilt. The louder they shouted into the void, the louder their own voices echoed back. By lunchtime, Deanna had texted, "Why would you forward my voicemail? That was personal. You don't have to weaponize everything." I didn't reply. I just screenshot it. Added it to the folder. Now labeled, Entry, Phase 2. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about sequence. Logic. Tightening screws on a door that once swung wide open to liars. Now it clicked closed with mathematical certainty. Later that day, I drove by the yoga studio. Parked across the street. Watched her through the windows as she tried to fake calm. Laughing with a friend. Hair tied high. But her eyes gave her away. Darting toward the entrance. Every 2 minutes. Like she expected a reckoning. She didn't know I'd already delivered it. I wasn't the storm. I was the barometric pressure drop before it. Quiet. Measured. Unmistakable. By sunset, she'd left 3 more messages. No apologies. Just shifting tones. From, we can still fix this. To, you've made your point. To, you're not who I thought you were. And that's when I smiled. Because she'd finally said something true. No, I wasn't who she thought I was. I was calm. And calm is the last thing you see before the trap closes. His name was Jonathan Clay, 29, graduate of some forgettable business school with too many vowels in the name. His LinkedIn said Operations Associate, Fulton Warehousing Solutions. I didn't need the resume. I just needed the logo, which I recognized immediately. Fulton Warehousing was a longtime distribution partner of one of our mid-tier clients. We handled their holiday overflow each year. I'd sat across the table from their senior procurement guy. Traded stale cookies at the December vendor meeting. Shared spreadsheets. Budgets. Vendor compliance logs. And now, apparently, a mistress. That's the thing about logistics. People think it's all forklifts and shipping labels. What they forget is that we see everything. We see where the paper trails go. Who logs in from what IP. Who uses company vehicles for off-site visits. We know what time your team really left the loading dock. And which employee always lingers just a little too long on the miscellaneous expense tab. Jonathan Clay was just another inventory discrepancy waiting to be resolved. I created a new folder. Clay, External Risk Review. Inside it, still frames of him inside my house. Timestamps showing weekday visits during business hours. A 3-second clip of him drinking a body armor and playing Xbox on our living room TV. At 2:34 p.m. on a Wednesday. I cross-checked his employer's HR policy, publicly available on their site. Paragraph 6, Section B. Employees must avoid conflicts of interest which may impact client trust, operational integrity, or present reputational risk to the firm. Perfect. I drafted the email under a pseudonym. A client concern escalation, routed through their procurement team's generic inbox. Short, clinical, objective. To whom it may concern, I am submitting a confidential concern regarding a possible breach of your firm's code of conduct and conflict of interest policy. One of your employees, Mr. Jonathan Clay, has been frequenting a client's residence during working hours, without disclosure, under circumstances that may reflect poorly on Fulton warehousing. Attached are time-stamped images and documentation for internal review. I submit this in the interest of preserving professional integrity across our joint networks. A concerned logistics partner. No signature. No IP trace. I sent it through a virtual mailbox I owned, scrubbed, and anonymized. 2 days later, I got a response from one of our shared contacts. Friendly tone, nothing explicit. Hey Gary, FYI, you may be getting new contacts over at Fulton soon. Looks like they're reshuffling a bit. Word is someone got a little too familiar with a client. I didn't reply. I just archived it. By the end of that week, Jonathan's profile disappeared from the internal contact directory. His name was scrubbed from the Slack integration we used with their logistics coordinators. No farewell message. No company-wide announcement. Just erased. I didn't gloat. Didn't tell Deanna. Didn't post online or whisper it into the ears of mutuals. Because this wasn't about Flame, it was about Frost. I didn't destroy him. I let the system do it. I placed the truth into a machine built to protect liability and let it chew slowly. You play stupid games, you lose your badge access on a Thursday afternoon. When you screw a man's wife on the clock, you forget one thing. The clock belongs to someone. And in this case, it belonged to me. It started with a certified letter. Cream envelope, gold embossed return address. Sent from a firm in Midtown that specialized in family reconciliation, which, translated, meant expensive lawyers in tailored suits pretending your betrayal was a misunderstanding that could be negotiated over mimosas. Inside, a formal demand for property access, citing marital residence rights, and alleging emotional retaliation via displacement. I almost laughed. Deanna had decided, belatedly, to play victim, not out of remorse, but out of habit. Manipulation was her native language. If tears didn't work, she pivoted to legalese. Her lawyer, a man named Brent with a face like a smug rotisserie chicken, had signed off on a 3-page threat. It said I'd weaponized silence and abused my position of financial control. Said Deanna had a right to inhabit the marital home until terms are renegotiated. My lawyer didn't even flinch. She'd been expecting this. We replied with a packet. Not a letter. A packet. Inside. Security footage stills, date-stamped. A log of door access breaches by unauthorized individuals. A high-resolution image of Deanna's lover using my house key. The original eviction notice. A printed transcript of her voicemail. It wasn't serious. I just felt lonely. And at the top, in a red-bordered page meant to grab Brent's little Harvard-educated attention, a sentence in bold. She willingly distributed access keys without spousal consent. This was her choice. She was not displaced. She was disqualified. Brent didn't respond. A week later, Deanna's new power suit strategy turned to dust. Jonathan, the lover, the toy, the tragic accessory, had gone quiet. Deleted his socials. Blocked her number. She called me once that night, 10:41 p.m., voice trembling. Did you do something to him? Is he okay? I said nothing. She hung up first. By that Friday, she was staying at her friend Vanessa's one-bedroom. Vanessa, the same woman who once told Deanna that I was emotionally beige and probably closeted. Now she was sleeping on Vanessa's IKEA daybed, eating microwaved lentil soup, and crying into a dog that hated her perfume. The voicemail started again. First, Gary, can we just meet somewhere? I need to explain things properly. Not like this. Then, look, I made mistakes. You did too. We both shut down. Later, please. One conversation. That's all I'm asking. Finally, are you even listening to these? Or am I just screaming into the void? I was listening. I just didn't feel the need to answer. Because what she never understood was that power doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't threaten behind attorneys or cry on borrowed couches. Power waits. It documents. And when the game is over, it doesn't gloat. It signs the final scorecard in blue ink and walks away. I saved the voicemails. Of course I did. They went into a new subfolder. Entry, legal fallout, her voice, optional listening. She thought the worst thing I could do was shout. She was wrong. The worst thing I could do was never need to speak again. Mediation was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Monday, because of course it was. The most unholy hour of the week, designed specifically for dry coffee, cold linoleum, and fake civility. I arrived 10 minutes early with my briefcase. Navy suit, pressed shirt, no tie, no emotion. The woman who entered at 9:06 was someone I barely recognized. Deanna walked in draped in black. Not just professional black, funeral black. Silk blouse, pencil skirt, oversized sunglasses, as if the courtroom fluorescence might trigger a migraine or expose something she hadn't curated. It was costume, theater, grief cosplay. She didn't sit at first, just stood behind her chair like she was weighing whether to throw it or collapse into it. When she did finally sit, she let out a sigh so dramatic I half expected applause. Her lawyer, Brent the rotisserie chicken, leaned in and whispered something to her. She nodded, pursed her lips, and then turned toward me with this look, like a disappointed teacher about to grade a failing student. "Gary," she began, her voice low, measured, weaponized with feigned vulnerability. This isn't who we are. We've been married 23 years. People drift. People make mistakes. But this," she gestured vaguely to the table, to the walls, to the world. "This is cruelty. You've made a circus out of our private life. You could have talked to me. But instead, you chose humiliation, isolation. You didn't even ask why. You just executed." Her lawyer gave a solemn nod, like they'd rehearsed that line. I didn't reply, didn't blink. I just reached into my briefcase and placed a manila folder on the table, slid it forward like a dealer revealing the final hand. Inside, security logs, motion sensor data, door timestamps, the eviction notice, her signed acknowledgement of receiving the house key back in 2021, the printed transcript of her voicemail, and finally, a still image of her on the porch during the meltdown, mouth open mid-scream, paper in hand, police cruiser glowing behind her. I didn't even include the bodycam footage. Didn't need to. I let them imagine the worst. Brent opened the folder and began flipping through, slowly at first, then faster. He stopped at the photo, set it down gently, and leaned back in his chair like gravity had changed. Deanna tried to speak again. "Gary, I was hurting. You were so distant. I tried to reach you." "I know," I said, the first words I'd spoken all day. "You reached Jonathan. At 2:34 p.m. on a Wednesday. In my bathrobe." Silence. The mediator, a woman named Ms. Carter who clearly hated her job and the fluorescent lights she had to sit under, finally cleared her throat. "Well," she said, "given the documentation presented and the nature of the property ownership, I believe Mr. Whitman's claim stands uncontested." Brent didn't object. He just pressed his thumb to his temple and stared at the folder like it might catch fire. Final terms were typed up within an hour. Full property rights to me. No spousal support. No post-divorce contact clause, mutually binding. Each party responsible for their own legal fees. As we stood to leave, Deanna looked at me for the last time with that same old trick in her eyes, a cocktail of disdain and desperation. "You really think this makes you the good guy?" she whispered. I smiled. "No," I said. "I just make fewer bad moves." She didn't follow me out. She didn't call again. And she never looked more alone than in that courtroom, dressed for a funeral, not realizing it was hers. 3 weeks passed like smoke through a vent, thin, acrid, gone before it settled. Deanna disappeared from the usual places, her yoga studio sabbatical, her social pages set to private, her wine night clique mysteriously silent. She'd become a ghost in her own life, present, but only where the light didn't reach. Meanwhile, I was reorganizing mine. On the third Monday of that month, I logged into the admin panel of our firm's private client portal. This wasn't some blog or press release. This was the digital sanctum where high-tier logistics clients got quarterly forecasts, contract summaries, and direct memos from senior managers like me. I drafted a short update. Nothing inflammatory. Nothing defamatory. Dear clients, as part of our continued efforts to ensure the integrity of all client-facing operations, I'd like to acknowledge and clarify that a recent security breach at my personal residence has now been fully resolved. Internal protocols have been strengthened accordingly. All data, property, and communications remain uncompromised. Thank you for your continued trust. GW, Senior Logistics Coordinator. Below the statement, I added a single image, one I'd filtered with deliberate restraint, A slightly blurred still frame of Deanna on our porch. She's mid-scream. The paper is in her hand. A cruiser's lights splash red across the siding behind her. Her face was just out of focus enough for plausible deniability. But anyone who'd met her, even once, they knew. The photo file name embedded in the image metadata read, client household breach _ resolved.png. Within hours, the calls began, not to me, but between each other. Clients whispered. One forwarded the post to his wife, who showed it to her sister, who recognized Deanna from a fundraiser last spring, where she bragged about managing her household better than her husband ever could. The fundraiser's chairwoman unfollowed her the next day. The group chat she ran, gone. By Friday, 3 acquaintances she'd known for years accidentally left her on read. It wasn't a smear campaign. I never used her name. But whispers are louder than screams when the air is still. And mine? Silent. Intentional. But I wasn't done. Because while she had her breakdowns and begged for just one conversation, I was preparing the last word. Something she couldn't interrupt, twist, or spin. On the night of what would have been our 24th anniversary, at exactly 12 a.m., a scheduled email triggered from my private vault. Subject line, you gave him everything. No greeting. No sign-off. No flourish. Just one attached image. The original eviction photo. Her name. His. The timestamp. The porch. The rock that once said peace. That email had been sitting in the queue for 12 days, long enough that I'd nearly forgotten what it felt like to hate her. But when it sent, I slept better than I had in years. No reply ever came. Not because she didn't see it. I know she did. Read receipt confirmed. Opened at 12:03 a.m. from her friend's apartment IP. Right after midnight. Right on schedule. But what could she say? Everything she used to control me, tears, guilt, sex, silence, gaslighting, had expired. She gave a stranger the key to my house. And I gave the world a door she could never close again. You got lucky. Most guys like you stay nobodies. That line hit harder than any punch I've ever taken, and I've taken more than a few. But it wasn't the words themselves that burned. It was the laugh. That sharp, nasal laugh from across the table. Patricia. My wife. My partner of 27 years, smirking into her wine like it was funny. I sat there, fork frozen midair, half a slice of roast beef going cold, and just watched the show. Blake had arrived 45 minutes late, like he was doing us a favor, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my first car and a suit that screamed overcompensation. He flopped into his chair like he owned the place, legs spread, chin lifted, and launched into some half-baked anecdote about closing a 6-figure deal from a rooftop bar in Miami. The guy hadn't even unbuttoned his coat before telling us what he made last quarter. Spoiler, he told us twice. I didn't bite. I never do. That's the thing about men like Blake. They're loud because they're scared. He talked big because he thought noise would cover the void underneath. I recognized the type. Hell, I used to fund companies that chewed up guys like him before breakfast. But Patricia? She didn't just tolerate him, she encouraged him. Topped off his wine, laughed at every half-joke, leaned in like he was the smartest man in the room. I could have been drywall the way she ignored me. Background furniture. Then came the jab. Right as I was carving into my second helping, he nodded at me with that smug little tilt, looked around the table, and dropped it. You got lucky, Todd. Let's be honest, most guys like you stay nobodies. But hey, you landed a woman like Pat, right? Credit where it's due. My knife paused halfway through the meat. I stared at the marble in the beef. Red. Raw. Almost poetic. Patricia laughed. Not the polite, awkward chuckle you'd give to keep the peace. No, this was a full-bodied, relaxed laugh. Like she agreed. Like the joke wasn't a joke. I looked at her. She didn't even notice. Blake didn't stop. He launched into a monologue about how real men take risks, about how his firm was leaning into disruptive acquisitions, and how connections matter more than talent. I'd heard this kind of talk before from interns who wore cufflinks to interviews, from men who thought LinkedIn was a personality, from boys who hadn't been humbled yet. The worst part? It was my house, my table, every brick, every fork, every bottle of wine, paid for by a man they both just dismissed like I was some lucky fluke who stumbled into a decent life. Patricia refilled his glass without a word to me. I put down my fork. My appetite was gone. Not from rage. Rage would have been too simple. No, this was colder. Quieter. The kind of stillness that only happens when something breaks clean, with no noise. A final snap. Blake moved on. He always moves on. Back to stories about some startup CEO he partied with, about a yacht he toured in Miami, about a girl he flew to Vegas just for dinner. But I wasn't listening anymore. I stared at the wood grain on the table. Every knot, every swirl, every imperfection. I'd built this table with my own hands 15 years ago in the garage, over 3 weekends and a case of IPA. Patricia had called it quaint. She wanted to buy something more modern from Pottery Barn. I said no. I wanted something real in the house. Now here I was, 40 inches from the woman who'd laughed at me, sitting across from the cousin she used to call a human cologne ad back when he couldn't hold down a job. Funny how memory gets selective when money walks in. I excused myself before dessert. Said I had a call. No one noticed. Not even Patricia. I went to my office. Locked the door. Sat down. Opened my laptop. There, in a folder hidden 3 clicks deep behind 2 layers of encryption, sat a file named Phoenix Holdings. I hadn't opened it in months. No need. Everything ran itself these days. Quiet. Clean. Invisible. I clicked. And smiled. Because while Blake was busy flexing in a $1,200 blazer, he'd walked right into a game he didn't even know existed. And Patricia? She laughed once. That was all I needed. Blake's voice carried down the hallway long after I'd left the table. That high volume, low substance kind of talking that fills silence for people terrified of being alone with themselves. He was bragging about a fund, Falcon Ridge Capital, I think, some boutique equity firm with an inflated name and an even more inflated sense of importance. Private, selective, very hush-hush, he said, as if secrecy equated to significance. We only hire 10 partners max, and I was personally invited. Guy who vouched for me. Used to manage Elon's West Coast ventures. The only Elon Blake knew was probably on Instagram. I stood at the top of the stairs, just out of sight, listening to him rattle off numbers that sounded made up, clients that sounded made up, deals that sounded too slick to be real. But Patricia? She was eating it up like it was gospel. At one point, he said something about taking early equity in a medtech startup, game changer in spinal implants. And Patricia actually gasped, like he was Moses descending from Mount Sinai with a term sheet. She'd never gasped like that when I told her about my own acquisitions. Then again, I never told her much at all. I walked back down once the conversation turned toward crypto. Figured by then he'd be too far into Fantasyland to notice me. He didn't. Just waved his wine glass in the air and said, "Yo, Todd, next time I'm in Napa, maybe I'll loop you in on a tour of the vineyards we're evaluating for restructuring. Could be fun. You ever been to Yountville?" Before I could answer, Patricia giggled and said, "Todd doesn't drink that fancy stuff. He's more of a beer and baseball guy." She said it like it was a joke. Like I was a joke. And she refilled his glass. Again. Listen, quick break. We set a goal to hit 10K subscribers. So tap subscribe if you're liking these wild stories of betrayal. Now let's get back to the madness. I stayed through dessert. Barely. Watched them plow through my creme brulee while comparing watches like 2 high schoolers showing off sneakers. I waited until Blake left, patting my shoulder on the way out with a "we should talk sometime. I could mentor you on building a brand." Mentor me. The man whose idea of a pitch deck was probably PowerPoint clip art. Patricia closed the door behind him and sighed like she'd just hosted royalty. "Blake's doing well," she said, "already collecting dishes. He's matured so much." I didn't respond. I just started stacking plates. Later, while she was brushing her teeth and humming something mindless, I sat in my office. Dim lighting. 1 desk lamp. The air smelled faintly of cedar from the drawer I kept my old notebooks in. I pulled out my phone first and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name C. Merrick. My old broker. Retired now, living in Montana, still calls once a year just to say hi and offer whiskey recommendations. I deleted the number. Not out of spite. Out of focus. Then I opened the laptop, typed the long password, paused at the second layer, and went through the old protocol. The fingerprint scanner, the voice key. A bit excessive, maybe. But when you've built something worth hiding, paranoia becomes policy. Folder opened. Phoenix Holdings. That name didn't exist anywhere public. Not in filings. Not in search results. Not in any flashy boardroom portfolio slide. It was a shadow, and inside that shadow lived over $40 million in assets, divided across shell companies, offshore accounts, and discrete funds that most banks only whispered about. I didn't build Phoenix to brag. I built it to disappear, to stop being asked to explain how I got here. No pitch decks, no investor interviews, no PR gloss, just capital. I scrolled through holdings like flipping pages in a forgotten diary: logistics, automation firms, agricultural drone development, a minor share in a biotech incubator out of Austin. And there it was. Line item 72B, Falcon Ridge Capital. I clicked it. Ownership, 17.6%, held through a proxy firm registered in Alberta, routed via a silent trust in Nevada, controlled by a Cayman umbrella. On paper, I was 3 ghosts away from touching it. But I touched it. And suddenly, Blake's voice, the one that mocked, the one that explained, the one that laughed at his own ignorance, sounded very small in my memory. I stared at the screen for a while. Then I opened the employee database link, requested access to the newest roster, and whispered, "Let's see just how far that mentorship offer goes." 18 years ago, I sold everything under a name I don't even answer to anymore. The company was called HoloByte. We specialized in enterprise-grade middleware, the kind of tech that never made headlines but quietly held the Fortune 500 together behind the scenes. At its peak, we had a dozen clients with names that made people's eyes widen. But I didn't build it for prestige. I built it because I liked puzzles. Quiet puzzles. The kind only 3 people in a room understand. When acquisition talks started, I hired 2 lawyers, one shell company in Vancouver, and a fixer who made sure my name wouldn't appear in a single damn document. HoloByte was absorbed under a conglomerate called Emergent Data Holdings. I walked away with just under $14 million liquid. Patricia never asked for numbers. She was more concerned with how early retirement might look to her family. I told her I'd consult, that I'd invest, that I needed time to figure things out. She never asked again. With that money, I didn't buy a yacht. I bought silence. I built Phoenix Holdings from dust and redacted ink. Offshore accounts, nominee directors, P.O. boxes, and places most people can't pronounce. If you peeled back every layer, you'd find one name, mine. But you'd have to go through hell in 29 jurisdictions to get there. I bought pieces of the world. Not glamorous ones. Not tech unicorns or fitness apps. I went after warehouses, frozen food logistics, truck routing optimization software. Dirt under the fingernails businesses. I wanted assets that didn't beg for attention. I moved like a shadow. Phoenix Holdings never once took out a press release. We didn't exist for press. We existed for leverage. Which brings us to now. Back in my office, the glow of the screen steady and soft, I watched the internal dashboard spin. It always took a few minutes to decrypt the proxy server. Another security measure. Paranoia is a skill, not a flaw, when you have something worth hiding. Finally, the interface loaded. Falcon Ridge Capital. I clicked through. 3 hops in the chain. A boutique firm out of Dallas, front-facing, full of grins and cheap cologne. A shell-holding firm in Toronto. A family trust tied to a P.O. box in the Caymans. Phoenix held the controlling interest at the final tier. 62%. Technically, they worked for me. Every employee. Every asset under management. Every office with glass walls and espresso machines. Including Blake. I leaned back, cracking my knuckles. My heart didn't race. No adrenaline. Just that same cool breath of air I used to get in server rooms when all the lights blinked green. Everything working. Everything under control. I tapped my headset and called the one person who still had my real number. "Charles," I said. His voice came on, calm and British, even though he's lived in Atlanta for over a decade. "Yes, Mr. Hargrove? Send me the full employee roster for Falcon Ridge. Use the trustee access. I want names, hire dates, partner tiers, the works." A beat of silence. Charles never asks why. That's why I kept him. "Right away, sir. Any particular reason?" I smiled, not that he could see it. "Just curious who's getting drunk off my dividends." He chuckled faintly. "Understood. You'll have it in your secure inbox within the hour." I hung up. Outside, the motion light flicked on, probably a raccoon again. But for a second, it felt theatrical. Like the stage was being lit. I stared at the black window glass, saw my own reflection older, maybe, but not slower. And behind that reflection? Layers. Shadows. Ownership dressed as nothing. People like Blake, they live in the surface. They wear success like it's a Halloween costume. Loud, obvious, store-bought. But power? Power doesn't shout. It signs checks. And cancels them. And I was about to remind a certain junior partner that the man he laughed at over roast beef didn't just own the table. He owned the building the damn table was in. The roster arrived in my inbox precisely 46 minutes after I hung up with Charles. Password protected, two-factor encrypted, view only, just the way I liked it. I opened it with a quiet satisfaction, like a man unfolding blueprints to a building he already knew was on fire. Blake Whitmore. Line 14. Junior partner. Hired 9 months ago. No equity stake yet, but fast-tracked. Strong recommendations, the notes read. Of course. Recommendations from people who owed favors. People who never read the fine print. I clicked into his onboarding file. Most of it was boilerplate. Background check, education, prior employment, non-disclosures signed on the right dates. But about 3 pages in, something snagged. Not a red flag. Not at first. Just a line that didn't match. Blake claimed to have exited his previous role at a fintech consultancy in Boston after project completion. And yet the HR notes from Falcon Ridge stated amicable departure after merger realignment. 2 different narratives. Both too vague. Too polished. I leaned in. A good lie always has clean edges. The dirt's usually hiding in the corners. I pulled a secondary file, internal compliance cross-reference. Falcon Ridge uses a third-party aggregator to verify hires against a proprietary financial behavior database. Something buried under legalese. Most junior partners skate through because no one expects them to be important yet. Blake skated through. But someone had marked a footnote, an old complaint during his Boston days, from a client who questioned the legitimacy of a valuation Blake had personally written. Nothing came of it. Settled quietly. But I know the smell of rot when it's under fresh paint. I took out my notebook and scribbled a single word in the margin. Leverage. I didn't need to bury Blake. That's the amateur's move. Loud revenge is short-lived. I needed to nudge the right domino. Let the machine eat him for me. I called a number few people even know exists. The direct line to Falcon Ridge's internal compliance office. Not the front desk. Not legal. The woman who handles things too sensitive to put in writing. She answered with a clipped, professional tone. Marcia Feldman. Miss Feldman, I said evenly, this is T. Hargrove. Beneficiary trustee, Phoenix Holdings. Silence. Then a small, tight inhale. She knew the name. Knew the weight. How can I assist you, Mr. Hargrove? No formal inquiry. Just a courtesy tip. Line 14 on your latest partner intake roster. There's an inconsistency in the exit narrative. Might be nothing. But in your shoes, I'd want to double-check the client logs from his last quarter in Boston. Look for a notation tied to Millstone Group. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, understood. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to. In this world, silence is confirmation. I closed the file. Shut the laptop. Outside, the sprinkler system kicked on. Automatic. Rhythmic. Precise. Inside, I felt it. That slow click of something sliding into place. Not drama. Not adrenaline. Just the cold satisfaction of having turned the first screw. By noon the next day, I got a one-line update from Charles. Internal compliance audit triggered. HR lead flagged onboarding discrepancy. Investigation pending. That was all I needed to hear. The wheel had turned. And Blake, for all his noise, for all his cologne and champagne talk and mentorship delusions, was now standing on a trapdoor. He just hadn't noticed the creak beneath his feet. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. Pacific, early enough to catch the East Coast team still caffeinated, late enough that no one could claim surprise. The invite came from a nondescript email tied to Phoenix Holdings' legal liaison in the Caymans, signed only as T. Hargrove, beneficiary trustee. No titles. No bluster. The board responded in less than an hour. Confirmed. I dressed with intent. Crisp blue shirt, no tie, same soft charcoal blazer I'd worn the day the Holobite sale closed. I didn't need to impress them. Just remind them. Power doesn't knock. It lets itself in and sits at the head of the table. At 9:59 sharp, I clicked the link. 7 faces populated the screen. 5 board members, 1 corporate counsel, 1 executive assistant taking notes like her life depended on it. The little boxes made them look smaller than they really were. All except for the man in the middle. Franklin DeWitt. Chairman of the board, ex-Deloitte strategist, proud owner of the kind of voice that makes everything sound like a TED Talk. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, but I'd recognized that double Windsor knot and practice smile anywhere. He leaned forward. Well, I'll be damned. Todd. I gave a slight nod. Hello, Franklin. You've been hiding. The last time I saw you, you were telling an arts foundation why server architecture matters. That was 15 years ago. We'd both been donors, him publicly, me through a friend's name. Still believe it does, I said. But I'll keep this brief. I'm not here for pleasantries. The screen shifted. A few faces straightened up. The assistant's typing intensified. Franklin cleared his throat. Understood. What brings Phoenix Holdings to our little corner of the portfolio? I'd like an executive review of recent hires, I said flatly. Silence. One of the board members squinted. That's not a typical request from your office. Any reason? No formal concerns, I said, and let the words hang in the air just long enough. Just a pattern I've noticed. Some alignment issues, particularly in junior partner intake. I believe a routine audit would be prudent. I didn't raise my voice, didn't point fingers, but every person in that call knew what I was really doing. This wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a request. It was a loaded gun left on the table, uncocked, unspoken, unmistakable. Franklin adjusted his glasses. Of course, we take these matters seriously. Any particular hire you'd like flagged? No. That would defeat the purpose, wouldn't it? A board member on the bottom left nodded slowly, the way people do when they're trying to look cooperative while frantically checking which skeletons might be closest to the closet door. I trust, I continued, that the review will be thorough and internal. For now. That for now did most of the heavy lifting. Franklin smiled tightly. Consider it done. The assistant typed something, then glanced up nervously like she was waiting for someone to confirm she'd spelled my name right. Thank you for your time, I said, and clicked leave meeting. That was it. No drama. No accusations. Just a whisper in a soundproof room with 7 people who understood that when a ghost investor speaks, you listen. Back in my study, I poured a splash of bourbon into a crystal glass I hadn't touched in years. Let it sit. Across the room, my old whiteboard still had half-solved equations from a project I abandoned last winter. Patricia had once asked what it was for. I told her I was playing with stock models. She called it cute. As I sipped, I thought of Blake. He didn't know it yet, but he was already under the microscope. And not the kind you can charm your way out of. All I had done was say his name without saying it. Now the room would echo with it. And when it did, I'd already be watching from 3 layers back, where real power lives, where whispers do the work. Blake's call came in just after lunch. Patricia had the phone on speaker because of course she did, while slicing a pear into thin, perfect wedges like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. Todd home. Blake's voice crackled with a tremor he couldn't quite disguise. He's in the study, Patricia said, tone casual, almost bored. What's going on? They pulled me into a meeting. Unscheduled. HR, someone from compliance, and this board guy Connolly or whatever, said they had routine concerns about my onboarding file. What the hell does that even mean? Patricia stopped slicing. I watched her hand hover in the air, knife tip pointed toward nothing. Blake continued, no longer bothering to hide the edge in his voice. They had paperwork, Pat. Like, highlighted stuff. Old employment dates not matching. A side LLC I forgot to shut down, big deal, right? It's dormant. And they were quoting me things I barely remember saying in the interview. Like they had the transcript. Patricia glanced toward my closed office door, then down at the pear slices, as if they might offer her a clue. I'm sure it's just procedural, right? No, it's not just procedural. They were circling. Like I'm already in trouble and they just need me to confirm it. This is bad. I've only been there 9 months, Pat. I was fast-tracked. I need this. She looked at the phone, then stood and walked it to my door. Knocked twice. Todd? Blake's on the line. Says there's something going on at his office. I didn't look up from my screen. Just minimized the stock performance dashboard and turned to her with that same flat look she always mistook for distraction. What sort of something? She hesitated. Compliance. Some resume stuff. He's upset. I took a slow sip of water, let the silence stretch, then said, sounds serious. She blinked. That's it. I shrugged. Not much to add. If he's clean, they'll clear it. If he's not, I let it hang there. She left without another word, but her posture had changed. Straighter, more rigid. She didn't like not knowing what I knew. Back on her call, she tried to soothe Blake, empty phrases, vague assurances. I could hear the words through the wall, probably a misunderstanding. Maybe it's a random file review. I doubt it's anything major. But I heard it in her voice now, doubt. That sharp, sour note behind forced optimism. Meanwhile, Blake was unraveling. They said I'd get a follow-up meeting once legal finished reviewing external partnerships. What the hell does that even mean? I haven't done anything wrong. That's always the first panic. It's not about guilt, it's about control. And Blake, for the first time in a long time, wasn't holding the wheel. That old LLC he forgot to shut down? It was still active in state filings. Still listed him as primary. And it had a 3-month gap in reporting the year before last, right in the window he'd claimed to be fully dedicated to another employer. The math wasn't even that dirty, just off by enough. The kind of discrepancy no one notices unless someone tells them where to look. And I'd handed them the loose thread. And now Blake was the one yanking on it, trying to make it stop unraveling. That night, Patricia was quieter than usual. She picked at her salad, kept checking her phone, didn't mention Blake again until we were cleaning up. You think he'll be okay? I wiped the dish, placed it on the rack. Depends. On what? On how many versions of his resume he's sent out in the last 5 years, I said calmly. And how good he is at remembering lies. She didn't respond, just stood there, dish towel in hand, staring out the kitchen window into the dark, where the cracks were invisible, but growing. Blake didn't go down with grace. That was never in his DNA. According to the internal memo forwarded discreetly to my encrypted inbox, the final meeting was scheduled at 3:45 p.m. on a Wednesday in intentional time. Late enough that most of the office was busy, distracted, and less likely to witness a scene. But with Blake, a scene was inevitable. He arrived cocky, dressed louder than usual, navy suit, pale lavender tie, the Rolex with the diamond markers. Probably thought he was walking in for a slap on the wrist, maybe a performance plan with a few stern warnings attached. He had no idea he was already finished. The HR director was there. So was Marcia Feldman from compliance. And Andrew Connolly, the board member Blake had barely remembered last week, sat at the head of the table, looking every bit like the man who didn't just deliver bad news but had practiced the exact tone it required. They didn't yell. They didn't accuse. They presented discrepancies, documentation inconsistencies, undisclosed ownership of a side entity with recent financial activity, a conflict of interest clause he'd initialed without reading. It wasn't criminal. Not quite. But in a firm that handled investor capital with white-glove scrutiny, it was nuclear. He argued, of course, said the LLC was inactive, claimed the Boston client complaint was blown out of proportion, said everyone fudges a title or two to stay competitive. They listened, then slid the letter across the table. Effective immediately. Termination without severance. Access revoked. All digital credentials already suspended. A courier would deliver his personal belongings in a sealed box by end of day. The only thing they let him keep was his last expense card receipt for a $64 lunch he charged 2 days earlier, which now sat framed in irony. Security didn't escort him. Too messy. But they did walk him to the lobby. Politely. He left muttering, barely hiding the cracks in his voice, red-faced and trembling. He called Patricia 3 times in the next hour. She didn't answer, because she was with me. At the lake house. My phone buzzed around 6:10 p.m. I was on the back deck, watching the water move in slow glassy ripples. A single canoe drifted across the far side, was quiet against the evening air. I sipped black coffee with a splash of rye and opened my inbox without hurry. Subject line, termination processed, FRC. Short, clinical. The body of the email contained a simple note from Charles. As of 3:58 p.m. Eastern, Blake Whitmore is no longer employed by Falcon Ridge Capital. Final records are archived. No further action needed. Regards. See. I stared at it for a few seconds. No satisfaction. No grin. Just silence. That beautiful, perfect kind of silence that follows an orchestra's final note, when the sound is gone but the weight of it still lingers. Inside, Patricia was reheating leftovers. She didn't know yet. She'd find out soon enough. Maybe from Blake himself. Maybe from the cousin group chat she still checks too often. Maybe from that part of her gut that's starting to suspect the man she laughed at across the dinner table wasn't quite what she thought. But for now, I watched the water stretch out before me, wide, deep, and still, and thought to myself, that's one less fool who'll confuse volume for value, and one less person laughing at the wrong man. It was her idea. Let's do another dinner, Patricia said, too brightly, like nothing had shifted in the tectonic plates between us. It's been a while since we had everyone over. The tone was off, like a politician smoothing her skirt after a scandal. But I nodded, said, sure, and went back to reading. Let her play host. Let her try to patch the cracks with place settings and a chilled bottle of Chardonnay. She texted Blake 3 times that week. No response. She didn't mention it, but I saw the name pop up on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. One message sat unread for 3 days straight. Are you okay? Can we talk? It never turned blue. By Saturday evening, the dining room looked exactly like it had weeks ago. Same linen runner, same candles, same rosemary roast chicken I'd marinated out of habit. The difference? The silence. There was something brittle underneath the small talk now, like everyone could feel a wire stretched tight across the room, but didn't know where it led. Her cousin Elaine asked first, halfway through the salad course, "Where's Blake tonight?" Thought he never passed up free wine. Patricia tensed. Just a flicker. A pause in her fork as it hovered midair. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with a napkin. Looked up calmly. He doesn't work there anymore. The room went still. Elaine blinked. What? I repeated it, just loud enough. Blake. He's no longer with Falcon Ridge. Patricia slowly turned her head toward me. Her mouth was closed, but her eyes said everything. That horrible calculation flashing across the mind when a lie isn't told, but revealed. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then didn't. Her uncle let out a low whistle. Really? Wow. I thought he just got promoted. He did, I said. Didn't last. No one asked how I knew. Not yet. That's the thing about families. They want to believe the most convenient version of the truth until it's nailed to their foreheads. Someone coughed. Elaine glanced at Patricia. You didn't know? I knew something was up, Patricia stammered. But he hasn't been returning calls. That was the moment it happened. Subtle, quiet, but real. The shift. They stopped looking at her like the insider and started looking at me. No one said it. No one needed to. The way I said it, the calmness in my voice, the confidence that doesn't come from gossip, but from information, it changed the atmosphere. I wasn't the quiet husband anymore. I wasn't the man lucky enough to marry into charm and extroversion. I was the man who knew something, who had watched the chessboard shift and moved without noise. And Patricia? She looked like she'd walked onto a stage after the play had already ended. The rest of dinner carried on, technically. There was polite laughter. Someone brought up their kid's recital. A wine glass clinked, but the energy had bled out. I could see Patricia doing the math in real time. The emails, the meeting, the board. T. Hargrove. She hadn't asked me about the name. Not yet, but I could see it in her. The war between not knowing and not wanting to know. Later that night, while loading the dishwasher, she finally spoke. You seemed very sure about Blake. I placed a plate in the rack. I was. Another silence. Then how? I closed the dishwasher slowly. Dried my hands. Met her gaze. You ever wonder what I actually did before I retired? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because for the first time in our marriage, Patricia didn't see a man who got lucky. She saw a man she had never really known, and who wasn't laughing anymore. The message came just after midnight. Patricia's phone lit up on the nightstand, screen glowing in the dark like a flare someone shoots from a sinking ship. She glanced over, half asleep, then sat up straighter when she saw the name. Blake. She opened it immediately. Read it twice. Then a third time, slower. Who the hell is your husband really? No punctuation. Just that. Raw. Uneven. Frantic. She didn't say anything at first. Just sat there in bed, holding the phone like it might burn her if she gripped it too hard. I was in the chair by the window, as I usually was when sleep didn't interest me. Reading an old journal I kept around for nights like this. Quiet nights. Nights when people stopped pretending. She turned to me. Her voice was soft, but not unsure. "Todd." I waited. She hesitated, searching for the right place to begin, then gave up. "What did you do to him?" I didn't respond. Just closed the journal, set it aside, walked to the old armoire in the corner. Third drawer down, a key hidden behind the false panel. She watched me do it all like someone watching a magic trick they never knew they'd already seen. I opened the drawer slowly, pulled out a dark leather folder. No markings on the outside. Just wait. Turned, handed it to her. "Don't read it here," I said. "Read it in the office. You'll want a desk for this." She didn't argue. Just took it like someone takes a verdict, two hands, quiet, eyes uncertain. Downstairs, the study light clicked on 5 minutes later. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. She was in there for a long time. I could hear the soft rustle of pages, the occasional shift of a chair leg on the hardwood floor. Once, I heard her curse under her breath, just one word, sharp and hushed. The kind of sound someone makes when they realize a map they thought they'd memorized had led them in the wrong direction for 20 years. In the envelope, 5 pages of ownership diagrams, flow charts of holding companies, shell entities layered like nesting dolls, tracing back to Phoenix Holdings, a trust registry showing T. Hargrove as beneficiary trustee, and at the very top, a cover letter, typed and dated, signed in ink. Todd Hargrove, sole architect and owner of Phoenix Holdings. The letter was short, a brief explanation. Nothing sentimental, just the facts. The name changes, the sale, the silence, the reasons. At the end, if you're reading this, you either asked the wrong question or finally asked the right one. She came back upstairs around 2 a.m. Didn't speak at first. Just stood in the doorway, the folder still in her hands. "You built all of that," she said, not as a question. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "And you let me think." "That I retired early because I got lucky?" I tilted my head. "I didn't let you. You chose that version." Another silence. Then, Blake said, "He thinks you set him up." I met her eyes. "I didn't set him up. I just stopped protecting him from himself." She sat down on the edge of the bed like her legs weren't entirely convinced they worked anymore. "Why now?" I watched her for a moment, then said, "Because you laughed." She flinched, visibly. Not dramatically. Just enough. "I've been quiet a long time, Pat. But don't mistake quiet for blind." She didn't say anything after that. Just stared at the folder on her lap. Stared at the pieces of a man she'd lived with for 27 years and somehow never really met. Outside, the wind picked up. And inside, Patricia Hargrove finally realized she hadn't married a man who lucked into her world. She'd married a man who let her live in his. The sun rose clean that morning. No clouds, no noise. Just the hum of the mower and the scent of fresh-cut grass slicing through the crisp air like citrus. I'd always liked mowing. Meditative. Linear. One of the few rituals no one bothers to interrupt. Until that Sunday. I saw him the moment he turned the corner. Blake, standing at the edge of the driveway like a man who'd just crawled out from under the wreckage and couldn't quite tell if the crash was over. He looked awful. Suit jacket wrinkled, shirt half-tucked, eyes puffy and bloodshot. The sunglasses didn't help. They only made him look more like a child trying to put on a grown man's face after losing a fight with someone much bigger and much quieter. I didn't stop mowing. Just turned the wheel and kept cutting. The lines in the lawn didn't care who stood at the curb. He waited. I think he thought I'd give him an opening. I didn't. Finally, he stepped onto the lawn, walking with that same arrogant tilt. Only now it wobbled. Now it limped. "You set me up." He said it like it was a revelation. Like the accusation had weight. I cut another row. Everything. The compliance file. The LLC. You made them dig. Another row. "You destroyed me." He spat, voice cracking. "You could have just talked to me. You didn't have to." I cut the engine. The silence hit hard. I turned, leaned a little on the handle, looked him straight in the eye for the first time since that night at the table. He flinched, just slightly. Maybe it was the sun in his face. Maybe it was something else. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't change my tone. "I own what you mocked." A beat passed. His mouth opened, ready to respond. "And I remember," I added. "Who laughed?" His breath caught. I watched it happen. That split second when the truth lands. Not like a hammer, but like ice water poured down the spine. I turned the mower around, started it back up, and left him standing there, on grass I paid for, next to a house he'd once called comfortable. Behind me, I didn't hear footsteps. No retaliation. No comeback. Just the static hum of a man standing in silence, realizing he'd never been playing the same game. Inside, Patricia watched from the window. She didn't speak when I came in. She didn't ask what he said. She didn't need to, because the truth was already humming beneath her feet. This time, there was no dinner party, no wine, no laughter, just a quiet house, and the man she laughed at, mowing the lawn he owned. Without her, without them, without anyone. She's not wrong, you know. He is balding. Monica's voice pierced the air like a fork dragged across porcelain. Honestly, Danny, just trade up. At your age, it's not even that hard. Half these gym guys are desperate. Danielle's laugh followed, sharp, high-pitched, mean. Please. He's like an old sweater. It doesn't matter if it's ugly or threadbare. It's just there. He still thinks we need him. He's so predictable. I could write his weekly planner with a crayon. Brian heard every word from the den. The vent above the fireplace didn't just circulate air. It carried sound. Every giggle, every clink of wine glasses, every insult. He didn't move. Not at first. Just stared at the muted TV, where an old black and white western flickered uselessly in front of him. He wasn't even sure what scene he was watching anymore. His ears were locked on the kitchen, their laughter thick and syrupy, like a drink spiked with poison. Then he stood, quiet, controlled. Not a slam, not a sigh. Just up, like someone calmly leaving a funeral. Listen, quick break. We set a goal to hit 10K subscribers. So tap subscribe if you're liking these wild stories of betrayal. Now let's get back to the madness. Upstairs, he grabbed a bag, not the travel one, the black one from the closet shelf, the one Danielle once called his bachelor duffel. He packed like he was folding a letter. Jeans, socks, dress shirt. The gray sweater she'd once said made him look less tired. A razor, though he hardly needed one anymore. He paused at the nightstand. There was a photo of them from 10 years ago. The opening party of the salon. Her in a red dress, arm looped through his, a champagne flute in her other hand. She looked like a woman in love, or at least like someone who wanted to look like she was in love. He looked happy, genuinely. He left the photo face down. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on the balcony of a modest rental on the edge of town, nursing a bitter gas station coffee and staring at a stack of old documents. The folder was labeled Sundown Financial, 2013. Yellowed at the edges, still crisp inside. Danielle had skimmed the papers back then. Smiled, kissed his cheek, called him the most boring, brilliant man she ever met, and signed wherever he told her to. She never asked what a silent lien contingency was. She never noticed the fine print that made Brian the conditional equity owner on default. And she sure as hell didn't realize that the building the salon sat in, he bought it under a shell LLC. Not for control, just for protection. He never thought he'd need it. Until now. He flipped to the last page of the deed. His signature sat beside hers, and Monica's, too. He traced it with his thumb. At the time, it was just paperwork. A safeguard. Now, it was a fuse. He sipped the cold coffee again. Didn't wince. He didn't feel sad. Not yet. What he felt was a strange, quiet warmth in his chest, like the ignition of something long overdue. It was always the same line with Danielle. Our salon basically prints money, she said one night over drinks with her friends. I mean, 6 figures a year, and I barely have to show up. Monica handles the day-to-day. I just make the calls. Brian stood a few feet away, half invisible, pretending to refill the ice bucket. Not a single woman at the table acknowledged him. Not even a nod. He could have been the butler. Or a tree. Danielle went on, louder now, like she wanted him to hear. We built it from nothing. Just grit and good taste. No one handed us a thing. Brian's fingers twitched on the scoop. No one handed her a thing? Right. Except a $75,000 unsecured startup loan. A lease agreement negotiated through his buddy at the bank. A build-out contractor who took payment in delayed installments because Brian vouched for them. But sure grit and good taste. She used to credit him. Back when the salon was still an idea scratched on a napkin during a rainy night in a diner. I couldn't do this without you, she said then. Her eyes were soft, her voice sincere. That version of Danielle was long gone. The new version wore linen suits and spoke in sound bites. Hair is recession-proof, she told anyone who'd listen. We've diversified revenue streams. God help you if you asked her how. Brian waited until Tuesday morning, quietest day of the week at the salon. He showed up unannounced. Told the receptionist he was there to check the plumbing, a line vague enough not to raise suspicion, but official enough to sound reasonable. The girl, barely out of college and wearing way too much contour, barely looked up from her phone. Back room's open. Knock yourself out. The moment the door shut behind him, he walked past the water heater and turned left, into the cramped admin office. Danielle's nerve center, as she called it. It looked like a Pinterest board had exploded. Glittery motivational quotes. A framed picture of her and Monica at some women's networking event. And in the corner, a locked drawer he'd installed himself because real paperwork needs real security, she'd said. He smiled. Still the same lock. Same key code, 0906, her birthday. Inside, leases, vendor contracts, loan repayment schedules, and one dusty blue folder labeled legal, do not toss. He sat in her chair and read in silence. The original lease still bore his signature as guarantor. The ownership transfer form, the one Danielle filed when she and Monica took over, was dated 2 years after the salon opened. But it was conditional. A provisional agreement that defaulted ownership back to Brian in the event of material breach or operational failure. Neither of them had noticed the amendment he'd slipped in during one of their quarterly reviews. Danielle was too busy showing off her new watch. Monica never read anything that didn't involve Instagram metrics. He flipped the pages slowly, like he was browsing an old yearbook. The arrogance. The way they strutted through life like it owed them a gold-plated blow-dryer. They thought they were untouchable. But the truth was, the salon they bragged about wasn't their empire. It was his asset. And it was very much still in play. Carter's office was in the back of a dental plaza, behind a dry cleaner and a smoothie bar that never had more than 2 customers. No polished mahogany, no espresso machine, no leather-bound law books on display. Just gray walls, cheap blinds, and a man who wore loafers without socks and didn't bother to hide his contempt for most of humanity. Brian liked him instantly. You said it was urgent, Carter said, not looking up as he thumbed through a manila folder. Something about marital assets? Something about an empire, Brian replied. That got his attention. Carter looked up, raised an eyebrow. You brought records? Brian slid 2 folders across the desk, one marked Sundown Financial, the other Belmore Salon Holdings. Carter whistled low. This is old. Some of this stuff is, wow, paper signatures? Originals, Brian said. Unamended. Carter cracked his knuckles. Let's see what your charming bride has been overlooking. They spent an hour dissecting it all. Startup loans from Brian's personal trust. Disbursements logged as investments, not gifts. Lien filings placed through an entity in Delaware, quiet, legal, invisible unless you knew where to look. And then, the crown jewel, a conditional equity clause buried in the initial partnership agreement. Carter tapped the line with his pen. Well, I'll be damned. She signed this. Twice, Brian said. Once when we launched, again when she bought me out. She thinks she owns the salon outright? Brian nodded. She doesn't. Another tap of the pen. She thinks she and her sister each own 50%. But that second agreement? It was never fully executed because the final disbursement was withheld. You paused the transfer, and no one followed up. Which means, legally, you never relinquished control. You're still the primary equity holder. Majority. 61%. Brian exhaled, no emotion, just air. So what can I do? Carter sat back. You could sell your stake to a third party by Friday. You'd need to file the transfer of control, notify the leaseholder, and submit a change of management request with the city. All standard. It'd take about 2 hours to process. Brian looked at the folder. Looked at the small mountain of signatures Danielle had scribbled over the years, smiling, distracted, trusting him to handle the boring stuff. Carter smirked. Want me to draw up the transfer? Brian didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot, where a woman in scrubs was crying into a takeout container. The world always looked cleaner from a distance. Simpler. He turned back. Not yet. Carter raised an eyebrow. Why not? Brian's voice was even. Let them laugh a little longer. There was no fury in his tone, no bitterness, just something colder, something patient. He didn't want to interrupt the show. Not yet. Let them keep playing their parts, confident, smug, unaware the stage was already on fire. Sandra looked exactly the same. Same bone-dry wit. Same navy blazer that probably cost more than Brian's first car. Same laugh that made grown men flinch. She slid into the cafe booth across from him with a smirk and a sarcastic, "So, you're still alive." "Apparently," Brian muttered, sipping his black coffee. "Though according to my wife's sister, I should have been upgraded by now." Sandra blinked once. "Please tell me you're not here to talk about your marriage. I charge hazard pay for that." He chuckled. "No, this is business. I need a buyer." "For what?" "A salon." Sandra sat back and raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so this is that kind of lunch." "Yeah," he said. "That kind." She didn't need the details. Sandra had known Danielle for years, through wine tastings, charity functions, awkward double dates. She'd seen Danielle's transformation firsthand, from hungry startup dreamer to high-gloss lifestyle brand with an inflated ego and a knack for erasing the people who helped her climb. Brian leaned in. "I want someone young, smart, hungry, but someone who can run it. I don't want revenge through fire. I want revenge through profit." Sandra smiled slowly, like a shark scenting blood. "I think I've got just the person." Mariela Delgado, 32, Mexican-American, single mom, scissor hands with a cult following on TikTok and a business license buried under debt and booth rent. Brian had never heard of her. Sandra set up the meeting for Thursday afternoon at a diner that smelled like bacon and ambition. Brian arrived early, wearing the same gray sweater Danielle says made him look retired. Mariela walked in 5 minutes late, full of apologies and still in her salon apron. He stood, shook her hand. "Brian, former investor, looking to exit something delicate." Mariela blinked. "You mean Belnoir?" He nodded. She raised both eyebrows. "Your wife's salon?" "Technically, mine," he said. "On paper, at least." "And you want to sell it to me?" "I want to offer it to you. If you're interested in running it, building it, making it yours." Mariela looked skeptical. "Why?" Brian stirred his coffee. "Because I believe in quiet transfer of power. And because the people who laughed at me forgot where their chair came from." She smirked. "I've been waiting for a shot like this for 6 years. Booth rent's a joke. You pay someone else's mortgage while they belittle your cuts. You'll need a partner," Brian added. "Legal support. Someone to run the handover cleanly. I have that covered." She studied him. Hard. Like she was trying to see the catch. Then she sat back and said, "If this is real, I'm in. Name the terms." Brian smiled for the first time in weeks. Not wide. Not gloating. Just enough to show her this wasn't theater. This was already happening. Sandra slid into the booth just then with 2 manila folders and a second coffee for Mariela. "I figured we might as well get started," she said. Mariela opened the folder and froze. "You're serious?" Brian nodded. "I'm always serious. I just usually let people assume otherwise." They stayed another hour, going over the framework. Lease terms. Employment rollover. Rebranding flexibility. Revenue splits. By the time they walked out into the sunlight, Mariela turned to Brian and said, "What's your wife going to do when she finds out?" He didn't miss a beat. "I don't think she finds out. I think she finds out the hard way." Danielle wore white to brunch, which was ironic, considering the conversation. "He's gone completely quiet," she said, swirling her mimosa like it was a magic orb. "No calls, no texts, no pathetic apology letters. Nothing." Monica took a bite of her avocado toast and nodded with fake solemnity. "Which of course means that I was right," Danielle said smugly. "I told you. He's spineless. Predictable. He probably thinks I'll come crawling back once I realize how hard life is without him." Monica grinned. "He probably thinks you still love him." They both burst out laughing, loud enough to turn heads at the next table. Danielle didn't care. She was glowing. A woman unbothered. Reinvented. She'd even changed her Instagram bio to gracefully independent sparkles last night. She'd ordered the goodbye bread starter just for the pun. Monica raised her glass. "To upgrades." Danielle clinked hers with a smirk. "And overdue replacements." Across town, Brian sat in a sterile notary's office that smelled like toner and air conditioning. No music, no laughter, just the mechanical clack of paper sliding across the laminate desk. Carter sat beside him, crisp navy suit, sleeves rolled, tie undone. "You're sure?" the notary asked. Brian nodded once. She began stamping. The transfer agreement was 8 pages. Brian initialed every margin. Full sale of controlling interest in Belle Noire Salon to Mariella Delgado. Effective immediately. Irrevocable. The ownership reassignment was next. Brian retained a 4% passive stake for consulting purposes, per Carter's advice. Just enough to keep a foot in the door, just enough to watch. Finally, the change of management. Filed in triplicate, with a hard stop clause to void all existing employment contracts not re-signed within 48 hours. Danielle and Monica's names weren't even on the new org chart. Brian tapped the last document as the notary passed it over. "Make this one certified." She nodded, got to work. Carter leaned in, lowering his voice. "We can courier this today. Overnight." Or, Brian cut him off. "No courier." Carter waited. Brian's jaw set. "Have Mariella deliver the papers. In person. I want them looking her in the eye when it happens." There was no venom in his tone. No glee. Just the precision of someone who'd waited long enough. The notary handed back the stamped packet. Brian stood, smoothed his jacket, collected the folder like it was nothing more than a grocery list. Outside, the sun was unseasonably warm. A breeze kicked up and carried the scent of jasmine from a nearby planter. Carter followed him to the curb. "You know what happens next." Brian looked at his watch. "They laugh at brunch." And then, he slipped the watch back under his sleeve. Then they choke on it. It was almost poetic how the weather cooperated. Clear skies. Golden sun. Just enough breeze to lift the front door chime of Belle Noire Salon like a bell tolling for someone who didn't know it was their funeral. Brian didn't speak as they walked in. He didn't have to. Carter, briefcase in hand, led the way with surgical precision. Mariella followed, calm and quiet in a black blouse, clipboard against her side like a weapon she didn't need to draw just yet. The salon was mid-busy, 2 chairs occupied, soft R&B playing overhead, someone getting balayage near the back. Danielle stood at the front desk, tapping on a tablet with the confidence of a queen inspecting her castle. Monica, perched on a bar stool, was in the middle of telling a story loud enough for the stylist to pretend not to hear. "And then I told him," Monica was saying, "if you don't have a Tesla or a hairline, we're not talking." She saw them first. The laughter stopped like someone flipped a switch. Danielle looked up, already annoyed. Her lips parted, ready to ask what he was doing here, when she clocked Carter's suit, the manila envelope, and Mariella, unfamiliar but unmistakably poised. "Brian," Danielle said, voice tight. "What is this?" Brian didn't answer. He just walked over to the front counter and stopped. Looked around like he was taking inventory. The pink orchid by the register. The wall of overpriced shampoo. The photo of Danielle and Monica framed behind the desk, arms linked, captioned "Boss Babe since day one." Carter placed the envelope on the marble. "Danielle Keating and Monica Green," he said, businesslike. "You are hereby relieved of all managerial and operational duties effective immediately. Ownership of Belle Noire has been transferred. Locks will be changed by 6 p.m. today. You are advised to collect any personal belongings by close of business." Silence. It was Monica who blinked first. "Excuse me? Who the hell are you?" Carter ignored her. Danielle reached for the papers, rifling through them in panic. This is fake. This has to be fake. Brian, what is this? Is this a prank?" Brian finally spoke. Calm. Flat. "No prank. You don't read fine print, remember? But we own this place." Monica barked. "You sold your share." "No," Carter interrupted smoothly. "The final equity transfer was never completed. The original lien remained in place, per contractual terms and financial default status, which I can explain in legalese if you want. You've been operating under a false assumption of ownership. This is simply a correction." Danielle looked up, eyes wide. "You can't just walk in here and do." Brian raised a hand. "I already did." Mariella stepped forward then, calm but firm. "I'll be reviewing the books this week. Any staff who wish to stay will be offered new contracts. Non-competes will be waived. No drama, just clarity." A stylist in the back actually smiled. Monica stood, knocking her purse off the stool. This is illegal. This is harassment. I'll call the... Carter handed her a card. Please. Do. My number's right there. Danielle turned to Brian. Her voice cracked now. You planned this. He looked her dead in the eye. You planned to trade me up. I just accelerated the process. He turned to leave. Mariella nodded once to the stunned receptionist, who was already texting under the desk. Carter packed his folder. Danielle reached across the counter and hissed, You think this makes you powerful? Brian paused. Then, without looking back, he said, No, but it reminds you I ever was. And then he walked out, the chime ringing sweet and final behind him. She stormed after him, heels cracking on the sidewalk like firecrackers in July. Brian, she barked. Brian. He didn't stop until they reached the edge of the parking lot. She grabbed his arm, not hard, but enough to spin him. Her face was flushed, breathing uneven. No more brunch smugness, no more curated composure. Now she just looked, startled, cornered. This is revenge, isn't it? She spat. Brian looked at her like she was an email from an ex-client, unnecessary and already deleted. No, he said, voice calm enough to be condescending. It's correction. You can't just ruin my life because of a stupid joke. Jesus, Brian, it was sarcasm. It didn't mean anything. You're right, he nodded. It didn't. That's why I stopped meaning anything to you. She blinked, disarmed. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was void. That's what scared her most. Not rage. Not tears. Just nothing. Like he'd already buried the version of her he once cared about and was walking away from the grave. Brian stepped around her like she was a pothole. She stood there, watching him leave. Then fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it. Her thumb jabbed the screen, bank app first. She needed a win, a number, something intact. What she got was a loading screen. Then a message. This account is temporarily inaccessible. Please contact your financial institution. She hit refresh. Again. Again. Her second card? Frozen. She called Carter. Voicemail. Again. Straight to voicemail. Her fingers were shaking now. Her heartbeat felt like it was in her ears. She opened her text app, scrolled, found her assistant's name Sierra, and hit call. Sierra picked up on the first ring, voice gentle but wrong. Hey, Danielle? Did you still want me to clear out your locker? Danielle froze. What? I got a call from the new owner this morning, Mariella. She said to make sure your personal stuff is packed before Friday. She wanted to be respectful about it. Danielle's knees almost buckled. She can't do that. That's my space. A pause. Not anymore. Sierra's voice sounded like she didn't even believe it herself, but the words had been said. The message was delivered. Danielle hung up mid-sentence. Her hand dropped to her side. The phone clattered onto the concrete. She stood in the middle of the parking lot, lips parted, mouth dry, watching the sun flash across Brian's windshield as he pulled away without looking back. It had all happened so quietly. No screaming match. No legal threats. No broken plates or bruised egos. Just paperwork. Time. And a man she thought was harmless, showing her exactly how harmless he wasn't. The empire she'd bragged about over oysters and mimosa towers? Evaporating. And she didn't even see the smoke until the walls were ash. Brian didn't bother to answer the knock. He knew who it was before the third one hit the door. Only one person knocked like they were owed something. Fast, sharp, entitled. He let her knock herself out. Eventually, the knocks turned to fists. Brian, open the damn door. He finally opened it, slow and deliberate, like unsealing a wine bottle he didn't plan to drink. Monica stood on the porch, hair wild, eyes red, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown of delusion. She wore an athleisure set that looked expensive and desperate. One heel was kicked halfway off her foot. Rage made her ugly in ways Botox couldn't fix. What the hell did you do? She hissed, stepping inside without invitation. You sabotaged us. Do you have any idea what you've just done to our business? Brian calmly shut the door behind her. Yes, he said. That's why I did it. She blinked. You don't understand it. I understand perfectly, he said, voice like ice scraping steel. I listened to you laugh about me like I was some expired appliance. I watched you and your sister parade your success around town like you weren't standing on a foundation I built with my name, my money, and my signature. She opened her mouth, but he cut her off. And now you're here, in my doorway, because the party's over. Monica's mask cracked. The whimper behind her voice slipped out. This was our dream. Brian cocked his head. No, it was Danielle's show. You were the free bonus prize. Her voice sharpened. You think this is over? You think we're going to just let this happen? We'll sue. You'll lose everything. Brian raised an eyebrow. You might want to call Carter first. As if on cue, his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. He didn't even touch it, just slid it toward her. Go ahead. He's expecting you. Monica hesitated, then snatched the phone and put it on speaker. Carter's voice came through, cool and clipped. Miss Green, let me save you time. You and your sister both signed the same contractual paperwork. Your digital signature was captured via DocuSign on July 3, 2018, 2:42 p.m., from your salon's IP address. Would you like me to send you the access log? I didn't read. Which makes it enforceable, not invalid, Carter said smoothly. I suggest you spend your legal budget on something useful. Maybe a career coach. She slammed the phone on the table, eyes wet now, but not from sadness, humiliation. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. Brian didn't move, just leaned against the counter, arms folded. If it helps, he said, deadpan, I actually thought about letting you keep your chair. But then I remembered the Christmas party. The one where you told my niece she should get a real dad with hair. Monica flinched. That was 10 years ago, she whispered. I know, Brian said. And yet, here you are. Still loud. Still mean. Still surprised the bill came due. She didn't reply. Just grabbed her bag and turned, her heel catching on the rug as she stormed to the door. At the threshold, she stopped. Not out of dignity, but because her hands were shaking too hard to open it. Brian walked over, unlocked it for her, and held it open. Good luck, he said, not kindly. She didn't say goodbye. Just left. No more threats. No more noise. Just the quiet footsteps of someone who finally realized she never owned the room she strutted through. Danielle showed up 2 days later. No makeup. No armor. Just a wrinkled sweatshirt she'd never be caught dead in before, hair in a loose knot, like she was trying to cosplay humility. Her knock was hesitant this time, 3 soft taps, the kind a stranger might use when unsure if the house is abandoned. Brian opened the door without expression. No bitterness. No warmth. Just the same quiet neutrality he'd mastered in the mirror over the past 2 months. She didn't speak right away. Just looked at him, blinking like her eyes were still adjusting to a world where she wasn't in control. He stepped aside. She walked in slowly, sweeping the living room like it was a crime scene, one she wasn't sure she had permission to be in anymore. They sat. Not on the couch. He didn't offer. She stood behind the kitchen island. He leaned on the opposite side, a granite slab of silence between them. She started, then stopped. He waited. We built that together, she finally said. Brian, that salon, that life, all of it. Doesn't that mean anything to you? He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Once. It did, he said. Her eyes softened, hope trying to sneak in through a crack. Until I overheard you choosing a replacement, he added, voice low. Danielle froze. What? I heard everything. That night. You and Monica in the kitchen. He tapped the side of his head. The vent above the den? Carrie's sound like a concert hall. She covered her mouth with one hand. I didn't mean it. It was just a joke, he offered flatly. She didn't answer. He nodded again. You laughed. Both of you. Like I was a worn-out coat. Like I was optional. Danielle sank onto the nearest stool, as if her knees forgot how to hold her. I was hurt, she whispered. So was I. But you didn't say anything. No, he agreed. I listened. And while you laughed, I planned. She stared at the floor. You blindsided me. No, Danielle, he said, tilting his head. You closed your eyes. I just waited. Tears welled up now, but they weren't theatrical. No mascara trails, no sobs. Just small, real tears. The kind that come when a person realizes they miscalculated something they assumed they owned. I thought you'd always be there. He looked at her for a long time, then finally said, you were wrong. About that. About a lot. Her lips trembled. Do you still love me? Brian didn't flinch. I don't even know you. Silence stretched between them, thick, long, final. No yelling. No begging. Just the weight of something dead being acknowledged out loud. Danielle stood, slowly, as if her limbs no longer obeyed her the same way they used to. I should go. He didn't stop her. At the door, she paused and turned back. Eyes rimmed red, voice barely audible. Was any of it real? Brian looked at her then, not with hate, not with sorrow, just clarity. Sure, he said, until it wasn't. It was the same building, same glass windows, same corner lot with the overpriced metered parking and the ivy that never quite took on the south wall. But everything else was different. The gaudy pink and gold Belmore sign had been stripped, repainted, and replaced with matte black letters and minimalist script, Revive and Company. Clean, bold, sharp. The kind of branding that didn't beg for attention, but commanded it. Inside, the space had been gutted. The wall of vanity lights replaced with daylight-toned track fixtures. The velvet couch Danielle once insisted on, Instagrammable luxury, she'd called it, was gone. In its place, a sleek modular bench and a fresh-cut bouquet that didn't look like it was trying to flirt with you. Brian passed by at noon sharp, exactly 1 month after the papers were signed. Not because he planned to, not to gloat. He had a lunch meeting with a new client at the architecture firm next door, a remodel job for a boutique winery. But there she was, Danielle, across the street, alone, hair not done, sunglasses on, but not for style, just to hide. Hands buried deep in the pockets of a coat she wouldn't have been caught dead wearing a year ago. She looked like someone standing outside their own dream, watching someone else move in. She hadn't found another job. The friends who cheered her on at brunch had faded. The networking circles stopped calling. She was radioactive now. Word travels fast in town when a woman's empire crumbles without warning. Monica? Gone. Moved to Scottsdale. Something about a wellness opportunity and focusing on herself. Translation: panic escape and avoid eye contact. Danielle hadn't even fought to get her half back. Because there was no half. There never was. Brian slowed his walk, not to rub it in. Just enough to see the grand opening sign on the door flutter in the wind. Mariella stepped outside in a crisp white blazer, clipboard in one hand, iced coffee in the other. She spotted Brian and smiled, wide and real. Morning, Mr. Keating. He gave a small wave back. Looks good, Mariella. Thanks to you, she said, tapping the glass. Already booked out for the month. Clients love the new look. Credit where it's due, he said. You built it. No, she replied, we reclaimed it. Across the street, Danielle saw the exchange. She froze. For a moment, she looked like she might cross. Might call his name. Might throw herself into the middle of the street just to ask how it all unraveled so quickly. But she didn't. She just stood there, behind the tinted lenses, one hand tightening around the strap of her bag. She looked through the glass, past the fresh branding and humming stylists and smiling clients. Past the woman running the show with quiet authority. And she saw him. Brian. Not behind her anymore. Not holding her coat. Not nodding politely during girl boss brunches or signing checks in the background. But there. Real. Still. And waving. Like a ghost she'd mocked and accidentally given the keys to her kingdom. He turned, walked into the building next door, and disappeared. And Danielle? She stayed on the sidewalk, staring into the salon window, watching someone else thrive in the place she once claimed without understanding who had carved its foundation. The place she thought she owned. The man she thought she could replace. And the moment she finally understood, she never saw any of it coming. The steak was still bleeding on the plate when she said it. We weren't fighting. We weren't even talking. Just chewing in sync like some god-awful metronome of a dying marriage. The kind of silence that's not peaceful, it's surgical. Cold. Clinical. Like two strangers waiting for test results they already know are bad. Then, mid-chew, she pushed her plate an inch forward, just enough to make the silverware clatter, and stood up so quickly her chair screeched against the tile. That sound alone was violent. It sliced the air like she'd been rehearsing it in her head for weeks. Maybe months. I've had enough. No context. No wind-up. Just that. I remember how the gravy on her potatoes had congealed. How the ice in my glass had melted into a lukewarm puddle around the bourbon I hadn't touched. I set my fork down carefully, like it was made of glass. Looked up. Her lipstick was perfect. Not a smudge. I remember thinking she dressed up to destroy something. And then I said it. Finally. One word. No sarcasm. No volume. Just release. She blinked, thrown. like I'd stolen the punchline of a joke she thought only she knew. Then she scoffed, cocked her hip like a lawyer mid-cross-examination, and said the line she'd probably been saving like ammunition. I'm not asking. I'm telling you I'm done. I found someone who sees me. There it was. Sees me. The line from every cheap affair novel with the torn bodice on the cover. She wanted me to beg, rage, cry, do something that would make her feel like she still mattered to me in some twisted way. But I didn't. I just nodded once and stood up slowly, brushing non-existent crumbs from my pants like I was done with a meeting. Then I said, I'll load the dishwasher. I didn't ask who he was. I already knew it wasn't a stranger. Jade was methodical, calculated. She'd test the water before she ever jumped. She stared at me like she was waiting for the rest. Maybe an insult, a tearful plea, even a cruel jab. But there was nothing. Not because I was numb, but because I'd already been grieving this marriage in secret for years, quietly, like a man watching his favorite bookstore turn into a vape shop. As I loaded the plates, she stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out, heels tapping like gunfire across the hardwood. I remember the sound of the front door. Not the slam. The click. Intentional. Final. I stood at the sink, watching the water run over the plates, and realized something odd. The smell of her perfume still hung in the air, but it was already starting to fade. Just like her. And still, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt the first flicker of something else. Freedom? No. Calculation. She thought she had just ended the story, but all she did was start mine. She was gone by Friday. Not a word to her parents. Not a call to her daughter. She just vanished from the house like it had been a hotel room she'd overstayed. The only proof she'd ever lived there was the faint perfume residue on the curtains and the 3 empty hangers spinning in the closet like some Hitchcockian afterthought. She didn't leave a note. She left a Spotify playlist, new chapter, new me. I found it accidentally when her old iPad auto-synced in the kitchen. First track? Girl on Fire. You'd think it was a teenager's breakup, not the slow disintegration of a 22-year marriage. By Monday, she'd updated her address on our joint credit card account. I got the notification while stirring sugar into my coffee. She'd moved in with him. Zeke, 37, personal trainer. Drove a Dodge Charger he couldn't afford and wore compression shirts like they were a second skin. I'd seen him in the building before, tall, shiny, smug. The kind of guy who uses words like alpha and refers to himself in the third person when drunk. He worked 2 floors down from her. It was probably accidental the first time: coffee run, elevator chat, protein shake advice. Then came gym nights. Then networking mixers. Then hotel receipts for corporate retreats in nearby towns with no conference centers. She thought she was subtle. She wasn't. You don't start wearing silk lingerie on business trips for the networking. You don't suddenly care about squats and spin class when you used to call yoga cult stretching. And most of all, you don't text your husband, working late. Don't wait up red heart from a Marriott at 11:47 p.m. with a wine glass in the frame. Not unless you're sure he's too old, too slow, too checked out to notice. Jade told her friends I was sweet but stagnant. Said I was like an end table, reliable, decorative, and completely inanimate. She wanted fire. Zeke was fire. Funny how she forgot fire burns down everything it touches. I didn't call her. Didn't rage text. Didn't even delete the Spotify playlist. I left it there, song by song, like evidence in a trial she didn't know she was on trial for yet. Instead, I went upstairs, poured a scotch, and took out the business card I'd been holding on to for 3 years. Back when I'd helped a buddy get through a vicious divorce. The lawyer had said, if you ever need to protect your future, call me. Quietly. So I did. Next morning, 8:03 a.m., I was in a dark oak office across from a woman who wore navy-like armor and smiled like a chess player 3 moves from checkmate. She listened, took notes, asked 2 questions. Are you sure this is the path you want to take? And how quiet do you want to be? I said, silent, until the end. She nodded. And just like that, the counterattack began. No arguments. No pleading. No last-ditch marriage counseling funded by guilt. Jade thought she'd taken the wheel and floored it. But she didn't realize I'd already mapped the exits and greased the brakes. She wanted a reaction. That much was obvious. Within days of moving in with Zeke, Jade's social media turned into a digital cologne ad sweaty selfies with filtered sunsets, captions like she was narrating a midlife rebrand. Sometimes peace starts with burning the old script. New chapter, new fire. There was even a boomerang of her clinking glasses with Zeke, some rooftop bar downtown, with the quote, "Choose passion over predictability." I didn't comment, didn't even block her. I watched, quietly, the way a hunter watches the animal walk right into the trap it thinks it's outsmarted. My name was still on the deed, still on the accounts, still on everything that actually mattered. And she was out there celebrating like she'd won a custody battle against boredom itself. So while she posed with martinis and posted about her inner goddess awakening, I did the most radical thing imaginable for a man in my shoes. I disappeared strategically. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I gave no tearful monologues to friends. No whiskey-soaked barstool therapy sessions. Just smiles. Calm, polite, even cheerful. You see, people underestimate silence. Silence is unnerving. It's a vacuum that makes liars talk too much and betrayers second-guess themselves. Jade had counted on fury. Instead, she got nothing. That nothing haunted her. I listed the house the next week. Not on Zillow like a desperate man purging his past. No, I handed it over to a private agent. A quiet deal. All cash. Gone in days. I moved into a furnished apartment for the time being. Nothing fancy, just a base of operations. Minimal. Controlled. Peaceful. When the divorce papers came, I didn't fight. No alimony squabble. No demands. Just a signature and a nod. She walked away with what looked like a victory. She even texted me after. "Jade, thanks for not making it harder than it had to be. I think this is best for both of us. You deserve someone who sees you too." I read it, stared at the blinking cursor like it was gasping for a response. And then I didn't type a single word. She would take that silence however she wanted. Guilt? Closure? Maybe she'd convince herself I was crushed, that she'd spared me somehow. What she didn't know, and would never suspect, was that I'd already moved my retirement portfolio into a limited trust. That the cabin in Vermont she always considered just a dusty asset had been quietly refinanced into a shell company 2 months before she walked out. That the seemingly joint savings had been split long ago into 2 pipelines, one that trickled into the account she saw, and one that flowed somewhere she never would. Let her think she'd torched the old script. Let her celebrate the bonfire. I'd written a new script already. And the final act? She wouldn't be in it. But she'd sure as hell feel it. She thought she'd taken half. That's the part that still makes me chuckle. When I'm sipping coffee on the deck of a cabin she thought was a waste of weekend gas. Or when I open the app that tracks the rental property she never knew existed because real estate bores me. Jade walked out thinking she'd split the pie. In reality, I let her leave with a crust and a smile. It started months before her big "I've had enough" performance. Not because I suspected an affair, though the signs were there, but because I'd been married long enough to know when someone starts measuring the drapes in someone else's life. She stopped asking about money, and that was the biggest red flag. Jade always had a sixth sense for numbers. Not in a savvy way, more in a "what's mine is mine, and what's yours should also be mine" kind of way. She asked about joint savings like she was checking the weather, casually, in passing. She never touched the retirement paperwork again. She stopped pretending to care about the Vermont cabin. The shift was subtle, but to me, it was seismic. So I played dumb and started moving. The limited trust was the first domino. You'd be amazed how fast a good estate lawyer can restructure your financial DNA when you show up with a calm voice and decades of quiet discipline. Retirement accounts? Locked and shielded. The rentals in her name? Not anymore. Transferred clean and quiet into a trust held by a nonprofit shell I'd co-founded with my goddaughter Danielle 3 years ago. A mentorship initiative, if anyone bothered to ask. The cabin? That dusty little A-frame we bought for leaf peeping back in 2009? Retitled, refinanced, and removed from the marital asset list with the precision of a surgeon. I even sold off one of our older rental units on paper at a minor loss to myself. Through a holding company. She wouldn't have recognized the paperwork if it danced naked in front of her holding it "You've Been Played" banner. By the time Jade filed, all that was left was the primary checking account, the house, which I'd already liquidated, and her leased SUV. She walked out of that final meeting thinking she'd kept things fair. That's what she told her sister. That's what she posted in one of those faux humble Instagram captions next to a selfie of her sipping white wine in athleisure. We handled it like adults. Mutual respect and fresh starts. Sparkles. Mutual respect? Please. I respected her enough not to humiliate her publicly. But privately, I dismantled the scaffolding of everything she assumed she'd inherit. She got half of the primary account because I let it sit fat and untouched for months. She got the car because she fought for it like it was a trophy. And she got the most dangerous thing you can ever hand someone like Jade. The illusion of victory. She thought she'd leveled up, but really, she just exited the game while I kept the board, the bank, and the rules. And once the dust settled, I started building. Something quiet. Something clean. Something that didn't carry the stink of someone else's compromises. She thought she left a man behind in pieces, but all she really did was free up space for the next version of me. And that version didn't play fair. He played smart. The irony? I think she really believed I'd just fade, like a smudge on her rearview mirror. 1 month after she left, I was supposed to be the image of decay, hunched over, nursing scotch for breakfast, still sleeping on our side of the bed. That's the version of me she wanted to exist. The noble, tragic ex who mourns in silence while she does yoga on a rooftop and tells her new circle, I hope he finds peace. But grief wasn't what I felt. Clarity? Yes. Energy? Absolutely. And something else, something surgical, cold, productive. I didn't rebuild out of spite. I rebuilt because I had finally been given permission to evolve. Her departure wasn't abandonment. It was clearance. A full demolition permit, signed and stamped. So I got to work. First, I bought a home. Not a giant flex, not some ridiculous bachelor pad with LED lights and marble countertops. No, I found a 2-bedroom on a quiet hill just outside New Hope, quaint town, killer bookstore, real neighbors. The kind of place where people knock when they bring you pie, not lawsuits. It had an office with sunlit windows and a garden that didn't beg for perfection. It wasn't a fortress. It was a beginning. Then I handed over the reins to someone I actually trusted. Danielle, my goddaughter, 28, MBA, absolute shark in heels with a heart like polished steel. Jade always underestimated her, called her cute, like that wasn't the most condescending adjective in existence. Danielle had been quietly managing more and more of my side business, consulting for mid-sized logistics companies, while Jade rolled her eyes at every mention of it. She's sweet, Tom, but she still says, like, in meetings. Yeah, well, that sweet girl renegotiated a 5-year contract I'd been stuck in for a decade. And when I told her I wanted out, wanted peace, wanted her to run things full-time, she didn't hesitate. You finally dumping the anchor? She asked. Then added with a grin, about damn time, second dad. Danielle didn't want my sympathy. She wanted the keys, and I gave them to her. But the last move? That one was personal. I reached out to someone Jade wouldn't just not expect. She wouldn't believe it if she heard it whispered through 10 people and an anonymous letter. It took one phone call. Not long. 10 minutes, maybe less. I remember exactly what I said after the small talk. I think it's time we caught up. I have a story for you. And a proposition. The voice on the other end paused. Just a beat. Then, send me a time and place. That was all it took. Jade thought I was sulking in the ruins. But I wasn't in ruins. I was in blueprints. She saw a man in his 60s and assumed the clock was winding down. What she missed was this. Men like me? We don't fade. We shed. We upgrade. We go underground, not to die, but to reinforce. And when we come back up, we don't need to knock. We own the damn door. She thought she was starting her new life. Turns out, it was just a layover on someone else's layaway plan. The apartment she moved into with Zeke was one of those high-rise, boxy places with quartz counters and fake modern charm, or rented, not owned, of course. Zeke said buying was a scam by the banks, which was his way of saying I have debt, bad credit, and a phobia of adult decisions. Jade moved in thinking it was temporary. Exciting. Like crashing at a lover's den between chapters. But 2 weeks in, the smell of protein powder and Axe body spray no longer screamed passion. It screamed sweaty man-child with delusions of crypto grandeur. Zeke didn't cook, didn't clean, Didn't even pretend to look for a place together like she'd fantasized. He just kept his gym schedule, posted shirtless selfies with corny captions like "hustle excuses," and played Xbox at full volume while she tried to work remote meetings in the next room. And when she asked about long-term plans, he blinked like she'd spoken in Morse code. Plans? Chill, we're just vibing. But Jade doesn't vibe. She schedules, calculates, curates. Her fantasy was passion, sure, but her actual need was structure. Zeke? Zeke was a walking chaos app with good teeth and 2 pairs of shoes, both white and both filthy. Then came the messages. She found them one night when he fell asleep on the couch mid-bench press bragging YouTube rabbit hole. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up. She reached for it, not to snoop, she'd tell herself later, just to silence it. Curiosity is a hell of a drug. The chat was with a woman named Molly G. Cherries. 2 scrolls in. She's got money and regrets. That's all I need. Bro, she left her old dude for me rolling on the floor laughing talk about free ride. Honestly, not even fun anymore. But she pays for takeout, so whatever. Jade stared at the screen like it was written in flames. This wasn't a mistake. It was a manifesto. She confronted him the next morning, while he flexed in the mirror and complained about his macros. She held the phone up like a badge. He looked at the messages, blinked once, then laughed. A low, actual laugh. The kind that feels like spit in your face. You left your husband for this, he said, arms folded, biceps tense like that somehow made the insult sting less. You're not even fun anymore. At least back then, you were a good secret. A secret. That's all she ever was to him. An affair. A thrill. Something exciting to whisper about in locker rooms, not someone to build with. He went back to his shake like it was over. Jade didn't cry. Not right away. She packed her work bag, left the apartment, drove aimlessly for an hour, parked in the Whole Foods lot and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, mouth dry. She had left a quiet man with a steady life, for a loud boy with nothing but abs and a Google Calendar full of chest days. And now, she couldn't go back. Not because of pride. Because she didn't know who she'd be returning to. She assumed I'd still be waiting. In grief. In mourning. Maybe even grateful if she changed her mind. But she hadn't noticed something crucial. While she was chasing spark, I lit the fuse. It came on a Tuesday. One of those boring, gray-skied weekdays where nothing dramatic ever happens until it does. Her name lit up on my phone while I was reading by the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand, a playlist softly humming in the background. I nearly didn't look. I trained myself by then to ignore that particular notification preview. But habit still had its claws. The message was short, neutral, polished. Hey, I hope we can be civil about everything. I miss how peaceful you were. Let me know if you'd be open to coffee sometime. Just to talk. Civil. Peaceful. Coffee. She really thought those words would do the job. No mention of what she'd done. No apology. Not even a sorry for the way it ended. Just peaceful. The word she'd once weaponized against me during arguments. Why are you always so passive? So quiet? Do you even feel things anymore? Now suddenly, that silence she once resented was her siren call. I stared at the screen. Read it twice. Let the message settle like sediment in a glass of water. There was something almost elegant about it. How she was trying to re-enter through the same door she'd slammed shut with heels clicking and her ego on fire. That final sentence, just to talk. That's the one that made me smile. Because just to talk isn't a peace offering. It's a scouting mission. She wanted to know if the bridge she torched had magically rebuilt itself. If the man she left was still standing in the ashes holding out a water bottle. But I wasn't in the ashes. I was across the river, with a new home, new boundaries, and better company. I didn't type a word. Not sure, not maybe, not what for. I did exactly what I knew would make her stomach knot. I left it on read. Timestamp clear. Message delivered. Seen. That little gray phrase, read 8:41 p.m., is a scalpel. It cuts quietly, leaves no mess, and says everything without a sound. Because Jade thrived on control. On responses. Even silence from me used to have rhythm, passive-aggressive pauses followed by reluctant texts 2 days later. She knew the dance. But now? Now she was dancing alone. And deep down, she knew what that meant. No reaction wasn't forgiveness. It was dismissal. It wasn't rage. It was irrelevance. Let her wonder what I was doing, who I was doing it with. Let her imagine me still broken or maybe worse, indifferent. That message sat there, unopened again in her mind, long after it had been read on my phone. And while she stared at her screen, I just poured another glass of wine and turned the page. It wasn't a revenge dinner. Not exactly. I told myself that when I made the guest list, wrote the emails, picked out the wine. It was a celebration, technically. Quiet, elegant, just 8 people around a long oak table in a home with no ghosts in the walls. But there was one invitation that carried more voltage than the rest. I sent it out of politeness. At least, that's what I told myself. Jade. No flowery message. No drama. Just a simple line. Hosting a dinner for a new chapter. You're welcome to join if you'd like. 7 p.m. Thursday. I even put my name at the bottom, though we both knew no one else it could have been from. I figured she'd delete it. Maybe show it to a friend and laugh. Or worse, misread it as desperation. But that wasn't the play. The play was clarity. You see, closure is a myth people use to keep wounds open. I didn't need closure. I needed to let her see what she walked away from. Not the man she left, but the life she forfeited. I set the table myself. 6 plates, 2 spares. Linen napkins. Nothing pretentious. Just enough candlelight to make the wine shimmer. I served grilled sea bass, roasted vegetables, and a lemon tart that Danielle insisted we buy from a bakery she swore by. Danielle came early, wearing a navy pantsuit and bringing her new boyfriend, a startup guy with too much hair and great manners. My friend Alan and his wife. My neighbor, Ruth, who brought fresh-cut dahlias. People who mattered. People who had watched me fall apart quietly and rebuild without asking for applause. Then, at 6:59 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there she was. Jade, wearing a structured blazer over a low-cut blouse, like she couldn't decide if it was a dinner or a pitch meeting. Her hair was pulled back too tightly. Too much perfume. Same brand, but it clung a little more desperately now. Her smile was brittle. Not the warmth of nostalgia, just the awkward muscle twitch of someone pretending they belong somewhere they don't recognize anymore. Nice place, she said, stepping inside like a realtor who didn't get the listing. I didn't offer a tour. She looked around, noticed the framed art on the wall, modern, minimal. No traces of the old house, of our things. She walked past the coat rack like she might be looking for a ghost of herself hanging there. Found nothing. And then she saw the guest list. Danielle hugged her briefly, too tightly. Jade pretended not to flinch. Alan gave her a nod that bordered on awkward. The startup guy didn't know who she was and smiled like a Labrador. Ruth said, "Oh, you must be that Jade," and immediately turned to refill her wine. Jade blinked, like someone trying to re-enter a room that had already moved on. "Didn't expect this so fast," she said to me as I handed her a glass of wine. "You were always slow to change." I smiled, warmly even, just a little. "You taught me how quickly people can flip the script." She opened her mouth, then closed it. And then, as she turned to look toward the kitchen, she saw who else was already there. Not a friend, not a fling, not family. Someone from her world. Someone with unfinished business. Her smile slipped like paint in the rain. And that was when the real dinner began. She stepped in like she still had a key. Like the air would somehow rearrange itself around her, make space, recognize her scent, welcome her back as something more than a ghost in heels. But the house didn't flinch. It was clean, intentional, lived in, but not with the clutter of survival. No piles of unopened mail, no sagging cushions or untouched wine bottles meant to signal, "I'm doing okay." This place didn't scream recovery. It whispered arrival. The lighting was soft, from real lamps, not overheads. Art hung on the walls. Real art. Not mass-produced canvases with inspirational quotes about journeys and storms and sunshine. These were pieces I'd chosen myself. Modern. Sparse. Confident. She paused in the doorway, looking for something familiar to grab onto. But there was nothing. No photo of us. No framed wedding picture repurposed as a funny memory. No shared souvenirs. Even the scent was different, cedar and citrus, not the vanilla amber she used to drown the old house in. I saw her nostrils twitch, registering that fact. Perfume. Check. Blazer. Check. Posture. Upright. Confident. But the eyes flicked. scanning. She was trying to make it look like curiosity, but it reeked of inventory. "Didn't expect this so fast," she said, slowly making her way to the living room. "You were always slow to change." It was the kind of comment you make when you want someone to feel guilty for improving. Framed like an observation, laced like an insult. I handed her a glass of wine, gestured to the seating area where the others mingled, then looked her right in the eye and said, "You taught me how quickly people can flip the script." Her lips twitched. "Just a millimeter. You have to understand." Jade didn't blink easy. She wasn't the flustered type. She played people like chess, not poker. She liked the long game, the performance. But this room, this house, was off script for her. And she hated improv. She walked slowly past the bookcase, eyes skimming the spines like she might spot something incriminating, some relic of her reign. There was nothing. Just strategy books, memoirs, and a few novels with well-worn spines. No chicken soup for the broken husband's soul. No bitterness framed as enlightenment. She looked back toward the kitchen and froze. Someone had just entered. I saw her shoulders tense, not visibly. Just enough that someone who knew her tells, someone who'd studied them for 20 years, would notice. She covered it fast, turned toward me again. "So, you really started over?" "No," I said, sipping my wine. "I just started." The clink of plates from the kitchen. Soft laughter. Footsteps. Jade glanced over her shoulder, curiosity outweighing caution. And that's when the final guest stepped out. And the air in the room shifted. Jade didn't know it yet, but the ground under her feet was about to collapse. And I wasn't reaching to catch her. The timing couldn't have been better if I'd scripted it, and believe me, I didn't have to. The universe has a knack for poetic timing when your hands stay clean and your ears stay open. The final guest entered from the kitchen just as Jade turned to refill her wine, still clinging to whatever scraps of dignity she thought she was balancing in her designer heels. She was mid-smirk, mid-performance, offering some polished line about how it's just nice to see people living well, you know? And then silence. Not the awkward kind. Not even the dramatic kind. This was the kind of silence that introduces someone. All heads turned. And there she was. Clara Langford. 55. Immaculate. A presence, not a person. Hair in a sleek silver twist, navy pantsuit tailored within an inch of its life. She carried a bottle of wine, of course, always prepared to contribute. But her real offering was presence. Jade's face stopped existing for a second. It just froze. Blank. Like her software had crashed mid-boot. Clara greeted me first. No hesitation. No awkwardness. A warm hand on my arm. A kiss on the cheek. A quiet, "It smells incredible in here, Thomas. Thank you for having me. You're the only one I trust with wine this expensive," I smiled. She laughed and took the seat I'd reserved for her, next to mine, right at the head of the table. Jade stood rigid. Her wine glass tilted slightly in her hand, just enough for a drop to land on the rug she'd already mentally decided was too tasteful for me to have chosen on my own. "Clara," she said, voice flat. Not quite a greeting. More like a reflex. Clara glanced up. Cool. Casual. Maybe even amused. "Oh, Jade. I almost didn't recognize you," she said, with that trademark pause just long enough to sting. "You look different." Jade tried to recover, opened her mouth, maybe to explain the obvious question no one asked. Why is she here? But Clara didn't wait. She turned back to me. "This is lovely. So warm. I miss warmth at dinner." I nodded, setting down my glass. "Well, this is the first time in a while where everyone at the table actually wants to be here." Another flicker across Jade's face. Anger? Shame? Fear? Hard to tell when the mask cracks so fast. Danielle leaned toward Jade just then, not maliciously, just helpful. "You two know each other?" Jade didn't answer. "So I did. They worked together," I said simply. "Jade left the company about 6 months ago, right? Wasn't that around when there was that, what did they call it? Personal tension?" Clara chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it. Now, let me explain something. Jade's departure from that firm wasn't a clean exit. She spun it online as a mutual separation due to philosophical differences, but internally, there was a whisper trail. Words like insubordination, ethical concerns, and undermining leadership got passed around. Rumor had it she made a power play, tried to box Clara out of a major client, and it backfired spectacularly. She hadn't quit. She'd stormed out. And now, here was the woman she tried to professionally assassinate, sitting at my table, sipping my wine, laughing at my jokes. Next to me. Not across. Not down. Next to me. Jade sat, finally, in the only open chair, which just happened to be the least visible spot at the table. Not an accident. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. Her smirk had vanished. And in its place, a silence I hadn't seen on her face since the day she walked out of my life. Because in that moment, she finally realized. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost the narrative. The clink of forks and low murmur of conversation filled the room, nothing forced, nothing tense, at least not for anyone but her. Jade barely touched her plate. Her wine glass stayed half full. She sat stiffly, like a mannequin propped at a table she didn't pick, surrounded by people she used to look down on or simply forget. Everyone else laughed, shared stories, leaned in. She hovered at the edge like a misplaced caption under the wrong photo. Then Clara turned to her, casually but with precision. That unmistakable executive polish. Her tone had that gleam women in power sharpen after decades of being underestimated. "So nice to see you again, Jade," she said across the rim of her wine glass, eyes warm, voice calm. "You look tired." It was delivered like a compliment. Almost. The room paused just enough to register the weight. Jade blinked, once, twice. "It's been a long week." Clara nodded. Long weeks happen when there's cleanup to do. Jade's lip twitched. Her fork hit the plate with the smallest clank. She was cracking. I knew the signs. I raised my glass, slow and deliberate. To people who stick with you when others don't. It landed like a needle through velvet. Danielle smiled into her napkin. Alan cleared his throat to cover a chuckle. Even Ruth, bless her soul, sipped her wine in exaggerated silence. Jade stood suddenly, clutching her napkin like it might shield her from the air itself. "Well, I shoulda." I tilted my head gently. "Oh, you don't want to miss dessert." She hesitated. "It's lemon tart," I added. Clara brought it. That was the trap. Not loud. Not cruel. Just devastating. Jade froze. She knew. It wasn't about the dessert. It was about the details. Lemon tart, her favorite. Not mine. Never was. I always found it too sharp. She used to buy it from that French bakery on Broad Street. The one that closed last year. I hadn't touched lemon anything since she left. And yet, here it was. Brought by Clara. Brought by her former boss. Brought by the woman she tried to cut out of the company before leaving it in ashes. Jade's voice was low. Controlled. "How long have you two?" I didn't look at her. I just folded my napkin slowly and placed it beside my empty plate. "Since the day you left me," I said. Calm. Even. Almost tender. "Turns out," I continued, "when one person walks away, someone better might walk in." She didn't sit back down. But she didn't move either. Her hand gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white, like it might anchor her to something that hadn't been real for a long time. No one said a word. Because there was nothing left to say. Her illusion, this fantasy of a man still broken, still waiting, shattered in front of a table full of witnesses. And the worst part? She'd invited herself. She didn't slam the door. That would have required conviction, some final note of control, some last-ditch display of fire. But there was no fire left. Just the hollow shuffle of heels across the tile, the slow pull of the front door, and a soft click that sounded more like resignation than exit. No goodbyes. No, we'll talk. No parting jab. Just the scent of her perfume trailing behind like an old headline no one read anymore. From the window, I saw her pause at her car. She stood beside it, hand on the handle, staring through the glass, not at the street, but at her own reflection. Not the confident woman from her rooftop selfies. Not the fire starter from her new chapter posts. Just a woman looking at someone she didn't recognize anymore. She got in, but didn't start the engine. Just sat there. Still. Inside, the kitchen hummed with life. Clara was plating the lemon tart, cracking jokes about a silent auction we both knew she'd manipulated the board into winning. Danielle passed around more wine, laughing, animated, absolutely alive. Her boyfriend asked if the tart was homemade. Clara just smirked and said, "Close enough." Alan leaned in and said quietly, "You okay?" I nodded. But more than that, I felt present. Anchored. This table, this night, was mine. Built, not inherited. Chosen, not stumbled into. I poured coffee for Ruth, refilled Danielle's glass, and sat down again. Clara's hand grazed mine as I passed the sugar. It was brief, intentional, familiar. There was warmth here now, and peace, real peace. Not the brittle, performative kind Jade posted about with filtered beach sunsets and misattributed quotes. Not the kind you get from running fast enough to outrun your shame. This was the kind of peace that stays. I looked at the people around me. These weren't replacements. They were reinforcements. Not new characters cast in a drama I'd lost, just real people, showing up without needing me to explain why I rebuilt, why I stayed quiet, why I never fired back. Across the room, the lemon tart gleamed under the pendant light. I didn't even like lemon, but tonight, it was perfect. And as I lifted my fork, I thought about those words, her parting shot that night at our old dinner table. I've had enough. She meant it to hurt. She meant it to cut me down, to make me feel small, invisible. But what she gave me that night wasn't loss. It was permission. Permission to let go. To strip the rust from my life. To stop fighting for someone who was already halfway out the door. And to build something that, frankly, she never would have understood. So yeah, she had enough. But me? I had everything.